Good evening. Okay, good evening. I'd like to call to order the City of Sammamish Planning Commission meeting on December 6th at 6:32 p.m. I'd like to start with roll call, please, starting on my left with Commissioner Collins.
Mike Collins, congratulations to all you well people. I wish you'd stay that way.
Jeff Wasserman, I'm a well people.
Mahbubul Islam, I'm a healthy guy too.
Kathy Richardson.
Mike Luxembourg. Ryan Coleman.
I would like to note for the record that Commissioner Lipinski is absent with illness. I would also like to note for the record that as of 6:30 p.m. tonight, we are closing the public hearing for the environmentally critical areas ordinance. Thank you. With that, I'd like to request a motion to approve the agenda for tonight.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. I'd also like to request a motion for approval of the minutes from November 15th.
So moved.
Second.
Great, thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Wonderful, thank you. Cameron, would you please walk us through the calendar?
Sure. This is the last meeting scheduled for this, second to last meeting scheduled for this year, December 6th. We have one more meeting scheduled on the 13th, and same tasks on both meetings, to go through and start your deliberations and complete your recommendations. As you can see, handoff scheduled to City Council in February, and I think so. It's a fairly simple calendar. We have not done a calendar looking ahead into 2013 yet. The chair, vice chair, and I have talked about using the January meeting, and we probably are looking at a single meeting in January, perhaps for a bit of a retrospective on how this process worked. So maybe not having a lot of formal agenda items that night. May I offer a quick director's report, because it's sort of related to the calendar. In this room 2 nights ago, the City Council had a meeting, one of the longer meetings of our year, and one of the topics that night was the setting of the annual docket. And the docket is requests coming from any source to change the city's comprehensive plan or development regulations. We run an open window solicitation for those each September. We had 4 submittals this year, 3 from outside the city, organization, so 3 from private proposals. And the council went through that material with staff. They also heard a lot of public input. There is one item related to a proposal related to trying to keep Ace Hardware in the city. That's generating a lot of interest, and then 2 other items that are also of interest, one of which you recall, the Greg Kipp item that has been brought up here. So that process is ongoing at the City Council. We'll be working with them again next week on the 11th, and so I may have something more to say to you on the 13th about their decisions on all that. And that will influence our calendar looking forward.
Great. Thank you. With that, I think we are ready to move into tonight's old business. And what we will start with is the 2 outstanding, or I guess it's 3 outstanding evaluation forms. We need to make a Planning Commission decision on these recommendations, whether or not they are positive or negative overall, and whether or not they will proceed into amendments to the code. So Evan's got a bunch of useful information for us.
And bear with me, Chair, I'm just pulling the last item here from my little thumb drive onto the
great.
computer here in front of me.
Debbie, do you mind turning on the projector?
And so as you said, Chair, of course, I'm Evan Maxim. I'm one of the planners for the City of Sammamish. I apologize. I forgot to wear my name tag, kind of running around the last moment here, but I am yet still Evan. Of course, tonight we're looking at, just note for the record, the public hearing did close just a moment or 2 ago at 6:30. We're, as you said, going to go through a couple of our evaluation forms that have still been negotiated right up until essentially last Friday, right before the material for tonight was transmitted to the Planning Commission and put onto our website for public review. Give you a quick update on what we've been doing since last we spoke, and go through those evaluation forms and begin our deliberation process. I do want to note for the record, the city staff, as I reported to you at our last Planning Commission meeting at the public hearing, we met with the Department of Ecology and actually the proponents for the wetland exemption change. This is item 319. Met with the Department of Ecology staff on the 16th of November in the afternoon. I think it was actually a very productive meeting. It's one of the meetings noted in the second bullet here with Mr. Gee, and of course his legal counsel was attending the meeting as well. And then we've subsequently met with Mr. Gee to discuss kind of the proposal that we've put before you tonight, which is represented as item 319E. And I'll report to you on that ecology meeting in a little bit more depth in just a moment. We've also had at least one meeting, I believe two, with the Osgood team related to this item 415F. There's the Carson team, which is of course representing the Probst property, and I believe Mr. Tosti and others. We have had at least one meeting as well with Mr. Carson and that team to discuss item 415G. And then we have had some contact with the Friends of Pine Lake representative as part of our conversations here.
Was there a specific item that was discussed with Friends of Pine Lake, or was the discussion more general in nature?
The discussion was more general in nature for the most part. There were some concerns expressed, I think it's fair to say, around item 4-15 and around item 3-19, which is before the Plan Commission tonight. And out of all of those conversations and meetings, we have produced some revised evaluation forms for the Plan Commission's review and action tonight before you get into your actual deliberations. The first of those is item 3-19E, as we're terming it now. The main change that we're looking at around 319E, just to describe this, and then I'll pull up the evaluation form for us to look at. What we've done is we've focused on the wetland size threshold has moved from 2,500 square feet, you may recall was the last version we had of this, up to a maximum isolated wetland area of 4,000 square feet. The amount of alteration has stayed down at the 2,500 square foot level. Alterations to the wetland area itself would be mitigated consistent with our proposed mitigation in the draft code before the Plan Commission tonight. And we did keep as part of this option another flavor or another tool for flexibility, which is the idea of providing a 15-foot buffer and a 15-foot building setback. This particular option is the one that we discussed with the Department of Ecology staff on November 16th, and it is based upon their guidance to some extent, or their guidance is probably the wrong term in this case, pardon me for saying that, their feedback to the city staff that we've floated this idea out. And I think we're relatively confident that the Department of Ecology will accept the idea, presuming we have some more work to do. For example, adopting this into the Shoreline Master Program, one of the things we have to do as part of that adoption process is a cumulative impact analysis, CIA document, you may recall from your shoreline days. We haven't done that. That's one of the items actually the Department of Ecology even noted in their public comment that came in a little earlier this afternoon. So with that, let me, and of course I've jumped a little bit into my next slide. I apologize, I'm a little keyed up as you might be able to tell. We are looking at limiting the exemption, of course, to the isolated wetlands. So we're not talking about expanding to non-isolated wetlands. This has been an item of some concern for the Department of Ecology, I think based upon some of the comments they've seen from our citizens. They've made it very clear that they would not support an exemption related to non-isolated wetlands. Related to this, and I'll note this for the Plan Commission's reference, you may recall that we've produced actually a benchmarking table that's included in your packet tonight, which kind of compares where the city of Sammamish is relative to other cities and this wetland exemption item. And it's rather narrowly focused, and we've looked at the city of Renton and other jurisdictions at the Planning Commission's direction. The Department of Ecology did provide us some feedback about that particular exercise, and what they said is that when they're looking at adopting a critical areas regulation into a shoreline master program, they're going to look at the critical area regulations holistically. So kind of benchmarking across the board on specific single items like this was not as appropriate a tool in trying to derive whether or not the Department of Ecology would support this amendment as what we had previously thought. They did give us the yellow light, of course, around that 319E item based upon the cumulative impact analysis I referenced a moment ago. Let me pull up the form so we can go through it in more detail. And there's the ubiquitous pause while the computer loads. I apologize for that. Of course, so what we're talking about today, as I described a moment ago, is we are increasing the size of the wetland that is exempt from avoidance sequencing standards. So remind the Planning Commission that the exemption that we keep referring to is actually an exemption from a specific requirement around avoidance sequencing, and to a lesser degree around some of the protection standards contained in our wetland development standard, section 290. What we've done is increase that size from 1,000 square feet to 4,000 square feet, again, provided that that wetland area impacted is not exceeding 2,500 square feet. Does that make sense?
Got a question? No. Okay.
Based on that nuance, what this does is it does allow the proponent for this particular item, their wetland does at this point qualify for the exemption in that the wetland area we're discussing is less than 4,000 square feet. They would still be subject to demonstrating that the wetland is hydrologically isolated, that it's a non-riparian wetland, all of the other kind of criteria that go into the exemption itself based upon the small cities guidance document. We've discussed this with them, and they feel they've met those tests. The mitigation that we're talking about, again, is still focusing at that 2,500 square foot level. Based upon, I'm sorry, the amount of impact we're talking about, again, is still focused at that 2,500 square foot level, which is consistent with 319C, which also rated as an overall positive, and the mitigation is, again, consistent with our mitigation requirements. So we've rated this as a small N for the environmental impact. We are seeing additional increased impact to wetlands, so it does merit a small N. We do believe that this section of code is something that the city staff could implement in an effective and fair manner. And we do believe that this provides additional property value to the proponents.
So what I'd like to do is go down and give commissioners an opportunity to ask questions and clarify maybe our understanding of the rating that's been proposed. So we'll start with Commissioner Collins.
Evan, how would you decide what would qualify for the difference between the 2,500 and the 4,000? Would that be done administratively? It won't be in the code, correct?
So the way the code is set up right now, and this is actually in the draft code that you received on November 30th, the way that code is set up right now, isolated wetlands up to 4,000 square feet may qualify as long as the impact area is less than 2,500 square feet.
What determines the impact of the 1,500 square feet? Is that administratively, or does it have to, is there a portion of code that will be coming in?
We're not at this time proposing any impact to the amount of area between the 2,500 and the 4,000.
What determine what will not be impacted? Will that be?
Wait, so I want to make sure, I'm not sure I understand the question. I think what the proposed amendment would allow is potentially filling up to 2,500 square feet of a wetland if the wetland itself is over 2,500 square feet in size. Is that correct? And there could be other things that they could do, that you could do within that 2,500 square foot limit. Is that correct?
Yeah, so in the case of the proponent's example, to use them at least theoretically for a moment as an illustration, they have a wetland, I believe, in the 3,800 square foot range. Of that 3,800 square feet, they could fill 2,500 square feet. And they would mitigate for that using our mitigation requirements in our code right now.
And they might not fill it. They could
might not.
have other allowed impacts.
Right.
And then would have to mitigate for those impacts.
Right.
Does that answer your question?
I was wondering if there was more specifics to it than that. That's pretty general from my point of view, but that's acceptable.
Okay. Commissioner Wasserman?
I think you just covered everything. I think you just covered everything that I was questioning about right there.
Okay, great. Commissioner Islam.
Evan, comment on a couple of questions I have. First one is with respect to 2,500 versus 4,000 square feet. As I look through the research you have done for all the cities, I don't see anywhere where they've used the clever process that we are proposing here to start with 4,000 and then either fill 2,500 or otherwise. So the question I have there is that what is the scientific basis to say that a standalone 2,500 square feet wetland versus reducing 1,500 feet from a 4,000 square foot wetland will basically retain the same functions? As far as I understand that, wetland as a whole, the whole size of the wetland as a whole provides the function and values. When you reduce from a larger to a smaller, it is not equal to just taking out a smaller wetland in that case. So that's one question. And second question is, in that table that you have provided to us, almost in every cases I have seen, exemption goes to category 3 or in category 4 wetlands. Our exemption is proposed exempting all the wetlands up to the size limit for isolated wetlands. So I'm fairly concerned, but I wanted to understand the reasoning behind why we are exempting category 1, category 2, category 3 when no other cities would do so.
Well, let me take those questions in order, and bear with me if I begin to lose that second question a little bit. It's not intentional. The first question, I think there's two parts to the answer. I'll remind the Commission, of course, this section does work in combination with the mitigation requirements that we have in our code. So the fill that you might see in a hypothetical wetland up to 2,500 square feet, the mitigation sequencing that we have in our code right now would require at least a 1-to-1 creation of additional wetland area, presumably on that site, unless there was no option to do so in a technically feasible manner. And those ratios, as the Commission knows, could go on up, I think, up to the upper end of 6 or 8 to 1. I forget exactly. So I think the end result, the thought there is that the mitigation is intended to offset the impact in an environmentally conscious way. I think the other thing that it's fair to observe is this is one of the areas where what best available science would say, as I understand it, is do not impact these features at all. And we're really balancing two policy goals with this particular amendment. The policy goal of protecting, small isolated wetlands, as opposed to the policy goal of allowing for appropriate property ownership flexibility on the site. So I think that's the answer to your first question. Answer to your second question related to the category of wetland or the type of wetland. And I'm not sure it's explicitly noted in the evaluation form here tonight, and maybe that's an edit that the Planning Commission should direct the staff to incorporate. The draft code, I believe, and I'll double check if you'll bear with me for a moment or two, I think actually does specify that this is for category 3 and category 4 wetlands. And if that's not clear in the policy direction, perhaps the Commission would like to address that.
So I think that it would be worth considering adding that component of the policy direction that was in the previous evaluation forms to this. I think there's also a fish and wildlife habitat score that was part of some of the previous versions of this. Is that also intended to remain intact?
It is, and very lucky, I flipped right to the page, and it does still say category 3 and 4 wetlands in the draft regulations, and it does still have that habitat score reference of 15.
Okay, so prior to deliberations on this item, which are scheduled for our next meeting, we could update the evaluation form to reflect the entirety of the policy direction, not just the most recent edit. Would the Commission desire that? I'm seeing some head nods. Great, so consider that direction from the Commission. Commissioner Islam, did you have a further question?
Yes, so that consistency would be helpful. I know that code has that. I just didn't see in the evaluation form, so asking to be consistent there. And I think I didn't want to confuse you with too many questions. My third question would be a 15-foot buffer. As far as I have seen and reviewed all the signs, everything says buffer below 50 feet is totally ineffective. I know you're probably looking at each component of functions like hydrological functions, and looking at that might be protected with 15 to 30 feet. But I just wanted to caution that point that we just cannot take part of the science in isolation of the total science and reduce to 15 feet when all the scientists across the board agree that 50-foot buffer is the lowest buffer you wanted to go with.
So would that be, again, a policy decision rather than a science-based decision?
Yeah, respectfully, Commission, yes, it would.
Okay.
I couldn't hear that.
Yes, it would.
Commissioner
That goes
Collins?
back to my question, and it depends on if it's uphill or downhill of the wetland. If it's on the downhill side, you don't need a buffer as big because there is no hydrological component to it.
Okay, so let's come back to the buffer width discussion in just a minute, if we may. Are you done with your questions?
Thank you.
All right, Commissioner Luxembourg.
No questions.
Commissioner Coleman.
Yeah, just one clarification. So this amendment is for Class 3 and 4 wetlands, 1,000 to 4,000 square feet. Are wetlands less than 1,000 square feet still exempt?
Yes.
Okay, because yeah, that's right, that part of the code hasn't changed. Okay, thanks.
Okay, so it sounds like we all, I think, now have clear understanding of the recommendation. I think we need to talk through briefly. The current recommendation as proposed includes a 15-foot buffer and a 15-foot setback. I've heard different ends of the spectrum on the buffer requirement. I would suggest that staff might propose a different rating if we reduce or increase that buffer as part of our consideration of this item. So shall we have a little bit of discussion about the recommendation as proposed is a 15-foot buffer and a 15-foot setback. Can you give us a little bit of feedback on how that buffer compares to what exists currently on a wetland of this category and size?
Well, the city's minimum wetland buffer for really any wetland that's regulated kind of in a standard fashion, forgive the term, would be a 50-foot buffer and then a 15-foot building setback. I think Commissioner Islam was correct a moment ago when he alluded to us looking at a specific component of that 50-foot buffer when we proposed a 15-foot option. For Category 3 wetlands, occasionally some of them will get up into a higher buffer range, the 75-foot buffer width. I'd need to go and look at our code a little bit to see where that habitat score threshold is for the increased buffer width. It's actually in the material we have tonight.
Well, but that wouldn't be relevant because we know the habitat score that we're referring to wouldn't
It's 15 or
trip
less.
that,
Right.
correct?
I believe
Okay.
that's the case, yes.
And can you also give us a little bit of input on staff's support or comfort level around the 15-foot that's in the recommendation? Some background behind that number.
So the 15-foot buffer, I think there were a number of ideas that were being discussed at the time when we put this 15-foot buffer, 15-foot setback out. We did desire to have a 15-foot setback, just to be blatant about this, because when you have a house that's built, you often have access necessary around the house. You have yard area, the like. So the 15-foot setback was one of the items that we did not recommend decreasing because it effectively increases the amount of impact you have to the remaining buffer area. Thank you, Cameron, for reminding me, of course. In our conversations with the Department of Ecology, one of the things they noted when we were struggling with this wetland exemption criteria is that they do not regulate specifically wetland buffer widths in the same fashion that they do wetland fill itself. So the idea behind this originally was that we can modify our wetland buffer widths at the city's discretion without running into kind of the same hurdles that we've run into in some of our ecology conversations when we talk about direct impacts to the wetland itself.
Okay. So, Commissioner Wasserman.
I have another question. If you're looking at a building setback from a property line, it's pretty much a mathematical equation as to where that line actually is. If you're looking at a wetland and you're looking at a 15-foot buffer, how do you actually determine that? Because a wetland is kind of a,
Blob?
I mean, realistically,
Yeah.
it becomes a theoretical line, correct?
Yeah, so as part of the critical areas review that the city does, we have a critical area study typically prepared by the applicant, the property owner. They hire a biologist to go out and flag the edge of the wetland boundary. That often involves both an evaluation of the plant life and the soil characteristics. And you can see a very distinct change, in particular in the soil characteristics, when you're doing this on the ground in a field verification. That's then flagged by the biologist. They hang little pieces of ribbon off trees or whatever's readily available. And then typically the city requires a survey come back in or a civil engineer come back in and accurately reflect where those flags are on the site. Those flags are then used as essentially datum points when we apply the buffer in an arc from that point.
So is that done, say, twice a year or something, so that you have a dry season and a wet season, so you know exactly what the 100-year floodplain, for lack of a better term, would be for that wetland?
My understanding is that the soil characteristics in particular do not change that much from season to season. So you see the anaerobic soil conditions, whether we're talking about October, typically our driest groundwater period of the year, September, October, or, early February.
Mr. Islam.
I think as we look at this item, and we are now at E, so we had A, B, C, D, 4 different versions. In my mind, it's getting more complex and complex. It's a simpler issue, does not require to play with a lot of variables like weight, size, go up to 4,000, then fill some. I think it's a straightforward answer that we need to look for, which is what is the right balance size exemption that we can have, knowing that science does not support it, it is a policy discretion, and what is the size threshold we want it to have. It seems to me anytime we are playing with all these other variables, we are specifically fitting everything to a specific situation. And I feel that's what we should be avoiding, rather looking at a policy decision and come up with a size threshold that we feel comfortable with, and not tinker with buffer width and other variables.
So I would like to note that part of the reason why we've been going through these iterations is we specifically directed staff to work with ecology and the proponent of this recommendation to come up with a recommendation that would rate an overall positive. And that's what we're deciding today, right now, is do we agree with staff's recommendation that this is a positive overall effect? Some of the previous alternatives did not result in a positive overall effect, and that's why we've continued to work through and refine and perhaps make more complex the alternative. If we agree with this as a positive overall rating, that does not mean that we are voting on the change to the code. I want to be very clear about that. But we are agreeing that it is a candidate for consideration as an amendment to the code if it rates an overall positive. So I hear a little bit from Commissioner Islam that you're concerned about the way this is written, but I'm not comfortable that we have another alternative that rates positively, that meets kind of the needs of everyone involved in this.
Chair, if I may add to that, the distinction that Commissioner Islam is raising between the example that we've been using, the proponent recommendation, and the actual policy discussion, I think the staff has actually been very conscious of that, as to some extent has the proponent, and even our conversations with the Department of Ecology. We are rating this form based upon our perception of the policy value of the amendment, not the property owner perceived value of the amendment. So I think we have tried to be conscious of that nuance you just articulated, Commissioner Islam, in our internal discussions. Whether or not this is compelling to the Planning Commission, of course, is up to you, but right. I do want to at least recognize we have been keeping that in mind.
Right. And I am concerned in our attempt to simplify, we may actually shift the rating in a direction that would not be acceptable. So I appreciate simplicity. I'm just not quite sure how we balance simplicity with our goal of having a positive overall effect. So do you have a proposed change that you would like to consider, or are you suggesting that perhaps this, when we get to voting, we might?
Well, now that we're talking about the rating, I wasn't thinking in terms of rating yet. I do see I could see from an environmental standpoint, rating could stay a small n if we ended with a very simple change, which is filling allowed up to 2,500 square feet, or just creating exemptions straight to 2,500 square feet. When we play with other variables, in my mind, 2,500 square feet wetland and 4,000 square feet minus 2,500 from that wetland are not two same thing. Impacts are much higher that way. So I see that environmental goes to a larger end as we play with those variables. I see if we just play with one variable and change the size, we can easily figure out what the weighting factor for environmental property should be. When you are playing with multiple of those things, you have to take into account confounding factors that play in, and we are not looking at it mathematically to figure this out.
So you're proposing that this should be rated a large N for environmental based on how it's written?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Do we have other comments from other commissioners on that? Commissioner Coleman?
Yeah, regarding that, Evan, I was just reading the revised section. I may have been reading the wrong copy. Anyway, so for category 3 and 4 wetlands, we talked about the ability to fill up to 2,500 square feet. And then as I read it, it's a separate section where buffers may be reduced to 15 feet. Is it staff's expectation that an applicant would be able to employ both techniques? And if they did, that critical area study supporting that application, supporting that proposal would need to justify that that's okay to do?
I think it is the staff's, certainly as drafted in the deliberation draft, there's no bar to using both subsections on a particular wetland. And we would apply it that way unless the Plan Commission, of course, City Council adopts something different. The critical area study would need to justify both of those exemption thresholds, and we would evaluate both of those on a site-by-site basis.
And both of those activities, the fill and the buffer reduction they'd both be mitigated cumulatively.
Yeah, so yes, I think that's accurate.
Okay.
Commissioner Luxembourg, did you have a comment?
No.
Does anyone else have a comment? I'd like to share a slightly different opinion to Commissioner Islam's. I am not sure that the distinction between a 2,500 square foot wetland that's filled versus 2,500 square feet of a 4,000 square foot wetland that is filled is material to the rating on the environmental category. And that is the decision that we need to make tonight, because that is, I think, the primary difference between this version of the evaluation form and the previous version. Is that correct?
Yes.
So what we need to decide as a commission is, does that distinction change the rating or not? Staff has indicated that their opinion is that it does not. Commissioner Islam has indicated that it should, and we need to make a decision as a commission about whether or not it changes the rating. So are we clear on the question and the distinction? Commissioner Collins?
I'd also, you left out that it's mitigated at significant ratios.
Correct. So the how that 2,500 feet is mitigated would be the same in either alternative.
Could be.
It's simply a question of, do we allow a larger wetland to be impacted or not? That is I think, the materiality of the question. So I think we need to make sure that we understand that and have discussed that fully. I don't know, Commissioner Islam, if you want to say more on your opinion on this.
Sure. Thank you.
Sure.
Again, this is a purely policy decision on our part, so we have to just take it that way. We do have examples in front of us from other cities. I just don't see other cities making it as complex as we are making it. They have straight 2,500 square feet, category 3 or category 4. There is a huge improvement from a property standpoint from where we stand now, 1,000 square feet. If we allow filling of 2,500 square feet of a larger wetland, in a simpler way of explaining that would be cutting your hands and cutting your feet and let you slowly die over the time. And that will happen to that biological wetland that we have. It will slowly die.
That's very dark.
So we have, it is dark. What we are doing, it is dark. On the other hand, I'm looking at the whole reasonable use exception, the use of it. I am not yet given any information either from the city staff or from individual commenting on that, saying that reasonable exception does not work in those cases. I mean, there will be reasonable exception allowed in any cases. Wetland mitigation does not allow that. So I'm looking at all of those things. It's a balanced question. I feel like it is really fitting a specific circumstances, and it doesn't do a good service for the entire city, other property owners who may or may not fit into that circumstances.
Do you want to comment on that? And then we have a comment from Commissioner Collins.
Well, I guess to speak to the implied reasonable use exception question there a little bit, to tease out that line of thought, if I may. Reasonable use exceptions are appropriate when you have a site that's fully constrained by a critical area feature and associated buffers, such that there's really just no way to comply with the code and get appropriate use out of a residentially zoned, legally created lot. I think it's accurate to say that the proponent for this particular amendment does not have that situation. They have a different situation. I think the staff has looked at this question, though, of is this particular tool that we've created useful beyond just the specific example we tend to focus on in the city? And I think the staff conclusion is yes, this is an appropriate flexibility tool for the Planning Commission to consider adopting. Again, the policy decision at the end of the day is we're making a recommendation to the Planning Commission here.
Evan, I need a clarity on what you said. I didn't catch that. You said the proponent of this item has a little different situation. What I wanted to probably hear is that whether reasonable use exception allows them to have a reasonable use of the property regardless of the wetland or not.
Well, and I need to clarify my remark a moment ago, so I appreciate that. Reasonable use exceptions, as I mentioned a moment ago, are appropriate when a site is fully constrained by a critical area buffer. I don't believe that that is the case in the circumstance for the proponent of this particular amendment that's coming from the public. As I said a moment ago, I think the staff does believe that this is an appropriate policy amendment to our critical areas code. Remind the Planning Commission, there is a distinction when we're talking about shoreline lots here that's different from other upland lots, we might call them. Anytime we're looking at a variation to the city's critical area codes within the shoreline jurisdiction, it's actually a shoreline variance. So I've been using the term reasonable use exception a little bit loosely tonight.
Thank you. Commissioner Collins, did you have a comment?
Commissioner Mabubal's last comment impacted some of the discussion on fee and lieu. There's a lot of discussion that I hope to have tonight on fee and lieu. And what we're doing there is we're actually moving a wetland to an off-site location. So the description of cutting your hand in half is not really apt. We're allowing two baby cells to grow, and they may wind up coming back larger and provide a better environment overall. So it's not quite the correct analogy. I just wanted to object to that. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Wasserman.
Evan, I'd like to go back to and I guess it goes back to Commissioner Mabubal's comment, and it goes back to my original comment about documenting the size of this thing. I'm agreeing with what you're telling me about this. My question is, what happens if you get 2,550 feet? Okay, do you just cover it up or you leave 50 feet? And where I'm going with this is, 2,500 is 62% of 4,000. So maybe at some point you just say you can do 60% of mitigation up to 4,000 square feet or something, as opposed to saying, well, you can take 2,500 and then somebody's going to be worried that they're going to miss that line and it's going to end up being magically 2,500 every time. So I was just curious if you're getting back down to splitting hairs in administrative process before it's all said and done.
So
I was just curious about a percentage of up to 4,000 versus as an option, maybe.
At first blush, the percentage idea you just floated would substantively be the same as the evaluated form that we have tonight. So I don't think we'd have concerns on the part of the staff. The observation I would throw out is you've heard comments periodically about magic numbers, and just perhaps to segue to that for a moment, where did we get 2,500 square feet? Where are we getting 4,000 square feet? And that frankly does come from some of our evaluation of our peer jurisdictions. So in the case of the 2,500 square feet, that came from the jurisdictions proximate to the city of Sammamish on the east side. The 4,000 is, of course, if you look at a larger range.
Okay, so, so I hear Commissioner Wasserman proposing a slightly different alternative, and that is for wetlands between 1,000 and 4,000 square feet.
Chair,
that
it was a
it's-
question.
It was a question, it was not a proposal.
Correct.
Are you wanting it to be a proposal?
It was a question.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, any further discussion on this particular item?
Promise, I'll just make one statement as what I've heard from Commissioner Collins about fee in lieu program. If you recall, in our sequencing, fee in lieu would be something new that we are allowing, and it is not the very first thing in that sequence, is primarily because an off-site fee in lieu program does not work one-on-one for an on-site mitigation. So again, in the context of isolated wetland, yes, we can enhance or increase net area of wetlands somewhere else, but surely you'll be losing unique features of the specific wetland that you are allowing to be exempted from. So it doesn't quite, for me, do the same thing.
So I want to make sure I understand. What you're saying is fee in lieu or the mitigation that would be required is not a complete apples to apples from your point of
true.
view. Okay. All right, so I think we need to make a decision. I think we have enough information. Does anyone not think we have enough information to make a decision at this point? Okay, so we need to decide if this is a large N or a small n. And I'll start, Commissioner Collins, I apologize. For consistency tonight, just to make my life a little easier, we're going to just always start with you and go this way. Sorry.
My fee's going up.
I'll be happy to pay your fee. So what I would like to hear is whether or not you believe this should remain a small n or if it should change to a large n.
Small n.
So, okay. Commissioner Wasserman.
Small n.
Large N.
Okay. Luxembourg.
Small n.
And Coleman.
Small.
Okay, and I'm a small n as well. So this will remain a small n. Oh, I'm sorry, we have a reminder, to please speak into the mics. So we have Commissioner Islam recommending that this move to a large n, and the other commissioners present recommending it stay as a small n. So therefore, it will remain a small n. And I believe that that is the only evaluation area where there was some need for discussion. So I believe that means that this remains a positive overall rating, correct? Some head nods, please. Okay,
Yes.
great. So with that, I would like to request that we shift this into the final version of the form and that we add the other policy components to this form and publish that prior to our next meeting so that we can have that information in front of us when we deliberate on this item.
Okay.
Thank you very much. All right, now we get to move to 415. Are we ready?
Good and easy one.
Yeah.
That was a warm-up.
Item 415, I think a little bit of background reminder about the context of these sets of amendments is probably appropriate before we get into each specific item.
Evan, could you put the microphone a little closer to you? Thank you.
Pardon me, I thought I heard some feedback in the mic system and I was trying to back away. So we've been talking a lot, of course, about the pilot program, which would allow for some type of limited subdivision in this erosion hazard near sensitive water body overlay, in particular the no disturbance area. And the pilot program, I think you can break down into essentially three approaches to managing risk with the new subdivision. And really, we're going to focus the bulk of our conversation around item number 3 on the screen tonight. Just for the sake of context, item 415D, the version that you saw at our last conversation, is the basis for the proposed amendments 415F and 415G. So 415D is the starting point that we're modifying in these further alternatives. What 415D does right now is it focuses on managing risk, as I said, in 3 different ways. The first is during site construction. And you'll probably recall we have some requirements around very specific dry season construction windows, much more stringently closed for construction than what we do elsewhere in the city. We have requirements for installing mechanical erosion sediment control devices AKA Baker tanks in some circumstances. We have requirements in place for measuring turbidity as it leaves the erosion sediment control ponds during construction and looking at closing down the site if it exceeds a certain turbidity level. Things of that nature fall into Category 1. Category 2 is something that came up in the more recent versions of the alternatives, and this is really looking at post-construction water leaving the single-family homes, the lots that have been created, how that water is treated in the stormwater pond. And what's been proposed, of course, in I think both 415F and 415G is a 60% phosphorus removal requirement. Remember, our baseline right now is a 50% phosphorus removal, so this would ramp that requirement up a little bit further. The third item is really focusing on how we handle water leaving the stormwater system and traveling down to Lake Sammamish, the receiving water body. And currently, in 415D, we have effectively two approaches that we've identified. The first is the tight line approach, where you're taking water and you're essentially running it in a pipe with no way to get out of the pipe until it gets to the lake. So it can't create downstream erosion. The second version that we've proposed as city staff is what's being referred to as the low impact development approach. Has a 65% impervious surface limit requirement, a 65% open space requirement, a 10% impervious surface requirement or limitation, and then we do limit volume leaving the site. And volume is actually probably the key component to that one. Because of course what we're looking at is not just rate of water leaving the site or duration of the water leaving the site, but we're actually matching existing volumes as they leave the site. Volume control is what prompts the bulk of the low impact development improvements that you would expect in a subdivision. So volume control, for example, would prompt rainwater harvesting almost by default. Looking at minimizing your site impervious surface overall reduces, of course, the stormwater volume that's being generated off the site. With that, I would suggest that we likely will find our conversation better served by going to a table that I handed out tonight, and I have made copies of this table for the public to look at as well as we go along. I apologize that I'm not putting this up on the screen, but frankly, the table is fairly detailed. I've made several 20, 30 copies, I think, that are on the table here. The table is so detailed that it will not show up on the screen in an accurate way, and so I don't want to have people squinting and going blind while we're deliberating this tonight. What this table represents is essentially a comparison between the three alternatives before the Planning Commission tonight.
I'm sorry, Evan, can you at least show it up on the screen so that the public can see which handout they're supposed to pick up?
We can read it at the top.
That's close.
Of course, Debbie is gone.
Evan, why don't you just read the top line of the form?
Yeah.
Everybody knows which
Hazard
one.
near sensitive water body overlay and development in a no disturbance area. Does anybody need a copy of that?
Thank you. Very proud of the table. I want them to all see it.
Yes, no, and I apologize. You can see I'm not used to the document camera.
That's okay.
It predates my generation.
Oh, really?
I just said that into the public record, didn't I?
It kind of was.
I think it's, yeah, I took it as a,
Okay. I'm sorry, proceed.
So bear with me, Planning Commissioners, just to refer to this table. On the left-hand side, what you have is essentially a list of the criteria and how we've evaluated the three alternatives that are before the Planning Commission tonight. Alternative 415E, you may recall that this is the option that provides additional flexibility to existing single-family homes. That's the second from the left column. And that's really kind of the one that's a little bit out, the odd man out in this table because it's not related to subdivision.
I'm sorry, could you say that letter again?
That would be item 415E.
Thank you.
And that's the item that provides additional flexibility for existing single-family homes. Item 415F and 415G represent the two proposals before the Planning Commission tonight that are related to subdivision in the no disturbance area. You'll notice across the top that we have essentially The second, we have a description across the very top of the table under the substantive text. The second row is the pilot project limit. For 415F, the current proposal, as I understand it, focuses on additional eligible sites under 5 acres in size, and then looks at allowing for 3 plats and 3 short plats in the pilot program. This is different from 415G, which essentially has been modified to allow for 3 additional plats that just tightline, and then 3 plats that might be processed in a different fashion, i.e. using the low-impact development approach that we've previously discussed. The controls during
Can I
site...
pause you for just a moment? So there is no proposed limit for the single-family development change. Is that correct?
Not as part of the pilot program. no.
Great. And okay. I
And
just,
in fact, the single-family 415E is not even subject to the pilot program itself.
That doesn't mean it's been approved.
correct, but that's the way that the recommendation has been written.
The controls during site construction between 415F and 415G, this is the first of the 3 bullets I had on the screen a moment ago. Those are essentially the same. I don't believe there's any significant difference between those two, but for 415F and 415G. The water quality controls on site, which is analogous to the second bullet on this PowerPoint slide. For 415F and 415G, they're both proposing to limit on-site phosphorus control to 60%, as I described again a moment ago. And both proposals are proposing compliance with the 2009 King County Surface Water Design Manual for any project here.
Evan, it used to be that it was best available management.
BMPs?
60% is what's currently available, correct?
Yeah, so
Do you have to state a number in here, or can it go higher as the management practices improve?
there's essentially 2 numbers that have been discussed so far. There's a 80% phosphorus goal.
Right.
The all known and reasonable technologies approach. And then there's the 60% you have to meet this number requirement. 60% would be a more solid standard that we could measure to. And
that's
the
why
staff
staff
recommendation
likes
is to use the 60% in this case, rather than go for the ACART standard.
Evan, I think Commissioner Collins is a really good question. 60% is coming from the current known best available technology out there.
Yes.
We hope once we adopt the regulation, years will go by and we will be implementing those, and by then, hopefully technology will leapfrog. So the question, as I have heard from Commissioner Collins, is that instead of putting a single number there, shall we not put the best available at any given time? That way we're not tied to something that will be backdated in a couple of years.
And am I right, Evan, that the code actually does that?
No, the code proposals, frankly, from the 2 proponents here, both focus on the 60%, which is where the current technology puts us. What I believe Commissioner Islam and Commissioner Collins are describing is more of a goal statement of up to 80% removal, which would be something I don't think, again, would, am I misunderstanding, Commissioner?
If I can interrupt, no, that's not what I have heard Commissioner Collins saying, or I am saying. It's not the 80%, even 80% could be achievable at some point, and it could be dwarfed by technology to go to 90%. What we are saying that we, instead of tying to a specific number, say it is best available, feasible, whatever the wording could be, so that if number goes up over the time with available technology, then this limit goes up.
May I suggest that this is something that we could discuss a little bit further in the deliberation and code clarification?
Yeah.
Maybe provide some direction for Evan to be prepared with some alternative language for us to consider at the code level, but that we remain with this as a policy statement for the form? Okay, great, thank you.
Bear with me, Commissioners,
We were on
please.
60%, now we're on King County Stormwater.
So compliance, of course, with the adopted King County Surface Water Design Manual. In the table here, I didn't specify the 2009 manual, but I do think it's accurate to say that that's the manual we're talking about. And then in the case of 415F, the applicant has proposed a number of low-impact development techniques to further reduce the impacts of the development on that site kind of before water leaves the property. And they've certainly, I think, put that into the public record, but in general, those include requiring a minimum of 15% open space in addition to what's already required under the city code for recreational space, limiting the site, the individual lot impervious surface in each lot within the subdivision to 50%, revegetating all of the available open space. There are some things that are allowed to be located in the open space that's being retained, and that obviously would conflict with the revegetation requirement, but there is a proposal here to revegetate. And then 15% of each lot would contain drought-tolerant landscaping. These are items focused, again, primarily on item number 2 on your screen up above. The key difference between F and G in the city staff's mind when we were preparing the evaluation form for you is, again, really related to this, this third item that you have on the PowerPoint screen in front of you. And this is also represented on the very last row on the bottom of your table. And what we're looking at between F and G is how the water leaving the site post-construction travels down to the lake. And you'll recall that I mentioned earlier, the current pilot program proposal has a tight line option with no chance for the water to escape, or this volume control standard. So we're not increasing the amount of water in the ditch that could do action or work causing an erosion issue in the lake itself. The proposal for 415F looks at requiring what's termed level 3 flow control. It's an accepted practice in our 2009 King County Surface Water Design Manual. And what it's intended to do is really control the rate and duration of water leaving the site, but it doesn't focus on volume. And I can get into that more if need be for the Commission's information. It is something that we talked about just about a year or 2 ago when we were looking at our Surface Water Design Manual update. Conveyance could be by an existing man-made feature. An armored ditch would be the example for the proponent of this amendment. There might be other types of man-made features we could look at as well. And we are looking at evaluating the downstream drainage conveyance system to identify any known problems. This would be, as proposed by the proponent here, an evaluation all the way down to the lake, even if that's not required by the Surface Water Design Manual today. The difference with 415G is we still are staying with the 2 options we've previously identified as rating positive, the tight line or the volume control. We have questions? And with that, I'm ready to go into the evaluation forms unless...
So what I'd like to propose is we start with E. E is somewhat independent of F and G, and is complementary. So if E is rated positive, that could move forward irrespective of our discussion of F and G. Is that clear to everyone? There are different types of development that are being regulated.
Just to make sure I'm understanding, what you're saying, Chair, is that if it's possible, we could approve E, F, and G. They're each are independent.
I believe that is a possibility, yes.
Okay.
Okay, y'all ready? So, going to do a little reminder. E is for single family only. We currently allow single family development in this area with several restrictions. So this is adding some flexibility to single family development without subdivision. Staff has rated this positively. If you want to walk us through the form.
So, Chair, what we essentially do right now is we allow for single-family improvements on any size lot, and when you exceed 2,000 square feet of impervious surface on a lot, essentially there's a threshold or a trigger that happens or occurs. Pardon me for a moment, Chair.
Sure.
Sorry.
Can I use the time?
Pardon me, Chair, can we go back to the table for just one moment? I neglected to mention one of the items in the table that I should have a moment ago, and it's just been called to my attention. So under the 415F proposal, in that last row, one of the requirements or one of the proposals by the proponent there is to require that there's a peer review of any downstream drainage conveyance. So it's not just a kind of a proposed by a professional engineer and reviewed by staff, but we have an additional peer review to verify if there are erosion issues that we need to deal with in that existing conveyance. Those can be identified and required and addressed as part of our project review.
Thank you.
Sir.
So that's an administrative section that would be made that's different than what we have now.
Can we go back to E and then come back to F?
Thanks.
Sorry.
So 415F.
E.
Pardon me. It's been a day. 415E. So currently what our code allows right now is single-family development on, and we really don't limit impervious surface through the erosion hazard near sensor water body overlay per se. What we do is we have a threshold in our overlay right now that says if you exceed 2,000 square feet, you have to deal with your drainage. And we had identify essentially 3 ways to do that. The first is to tightline it down to a point past the erosion and landslide hazard area. And of course, if you're located at the top of the hill and don't have a way to run a tight line down to the bottom of the hill, that's really a non-starter. Second approach will be an infiltration system that can handle 100% of the stormwater generated on the site once you exceed 2,000 square feet. So we all know much of the plateau is underlain by glacial till. The size of the infiltration system we're talking about quickly becomes unmanageable and just frankly impractical on the site. And the third is a bit more of a flexibility tool in that it says that you can look at discharging your stormwater using best available science in a manner to decrease the risk of erosion in landslide hazard area or landslide hazard downslope. The challenge with that particular standard is that there is really an impact in some cases when you add additional water to the downstream conveyance. And so we end up requiring improvements for this best available science designed outlet that, again, price out a project that might be relatively modest in scale. Remind the Planning Commission, this is a requirement, even if you have, say, an existing 5,000 square foot house and you're just adding on to your kitchen by perhaps 300 or 400 square feet, or your house itself 300 or 400 square feet, you're now dealing with all of the drainage coming off the 5,000 or 6,000 square feet plus the additional area. What the amendment before you tonight with 415E does is it focuses primarily on large lot single-family homes. And if you can show that you're meeting the basic tenets of low-impact development, so 65% of the lot area is open space, 10% or less of the lot is impervious surface, and you're dealing with the stormwater on site such that there's no increase in volume leaving the site. So perhaps you have a vegetative flow path from a dispersion trench. That in of itself should be sufficient to address the drainage concerns that we have. This does not fix the challenge that small lots less than about a half acre have right now. This is more geared towards larger lot, single-family homes. With that, we do think there's a modest chance of some additional impacts under the environmental section, but we honestly think it's modest, so it's a very small end trending towards the neutral. We do think this is a neutral standard for the city staff to implement. It's a very straightforward standard in many ways. And of course, it does have a large positive benefit for property owners who are getting caught right now with this increased drainage review. So overall, this does rate positive.
So, questions and comments, Commissioner Collins?
Yes.
Are we on?
Pardon?
Okay.
Okay. Once again, I'm a proponent for rainwater harvesting. I'd like to see some...
Sir, I can't hear you. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I am a proponent for rainwater harvesting, and so I'd like to see a small proviso where the Director of Community Development can give credits for rainwater harvesting to decrease the net effect of impervious surfaces.
Respectfully, Commissioner, that's actually already built into the
That's
code
what I
as
wanted
it's
to hear.
drafted. Yep.
Great. Commissioner Wasserman. Commissioner Islam.
Evan, the last row on that column, no discharge expected to the lake. So I'm trying to understand what you have previously stated, so I'll paraphrase my way and wanted to hear an answer. In our current code, basically, it restricts a property owner how they would mitigate the water generated. In this 415E, we are giving more options on how they would contain additional water generated. In either case, no discharge to the lake, meaning there is no water going from that property to the lake.
No additional.
Or even the next property down.
Or, yeah.
In the example we're really contemplating with 415E, you're not going to see an increase in volume of surface water movement, if that makes sense. So, in a rainstorm event, if it's raining on a pasture right now, you might see some stormwater cross that property line on its way down towards the lake. What 415E does is it recognizes on a very large site, even adding a modest amount of impervious surface, you're not going to increase that amount of flow because it gets absorbed up into the plants or harvested as part of a rainwater harvesting system or as otherwise addressed. So there is some burden on the property owner to ensure that that happens, meaning if it's pasturage right now, they may need to do some supplemental planting. They may need to look at a rainwater harvesting system or cistern.
Or soil amendments.
Or soil amendments, or if it's really feasible on a very large site, an infiltration gallery. There's a number of ways to get to that volume standard, but what it does is essentially recognize that you're not seeing an increase in volume discharge.
I guess what I'm trying to understand, particularly 4.15E for single-family house, is I'm understanding, based on my reading, that this would not cause any harm to the volume of water going to the lake, or this would not increase volume of water going to the lake. We are just allowing more options available for a homeowner to develop the property.
I think that's accurate.
Okay.
Very good. Commissioner Luxembourg.
No questions.
Commissioner Coleman.
I'm good.
Okay, I don't think we have any questions or proposed changes to this form. Is that correct? Seeing none, let's move this on to consideration for deliberations. Now, I would like you to walk us through 415F, as in Frank, next.
Thank you, Chair. Bear with me for one moment.
Sure.
Is F in replacement for G, or this?
F and G could be considered together. The distinction is currently F is rated negative and G is rated positive, and I'll have Evan explain that to us.
So we want one to move ahead, not two at the same time. Is that?
So I want if F moves to positive, then it would be kind of a supplement to G for properties less than 5 acres in size.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So a moment ago, I summarized many of the components to 415F, and to be clear, I think there's a lot of good low-impact development components to this proposal. We've summarized some in the table tonight that I just went over with the Planning Commission. There are more here on the form. The challenge with 415F is, again, when we get back to the 3 ways in which we're managing risk in the pilot program. 415F focuses primarily on the first 2 items I identified: site construction, which all of the pilot program options focus on, and then secondarily, how we're handling water on the site for water quality control. What it doesn't really focus on, I misspoke a moment ago, I apologize. What it doesn't address adequately in the staff's recommendation to you tonight is that discharge from the stormwater facility down to the lake. The proponent for this one, 415F, has proposed something to address that. The staff just has concerns as to whether or not that will successfully address the situation that we're concerned about, the risk that we're concerned about. So I have the description up here on the screen. I'm going to go to the second page. And in particular, what we're looking at here is the level 3 flow control and the discharge to the existing man-made conveyance. For example, an armored ditch. That existing existing conveyance, it doesn't have the benefits that a tightline system does, where you don't have the option for the water to do essentially work on the soils between the stormwater pond and the lake. And it doesn't have the value or the benefits of the low impact development approach, where you're limiting the volume of water leaving the site such that no additional work in that downstream conveyance is expected at all. Does that make sense? So this is a degree of risk management that I'm articulating to you, if that's not clear so far. So we did rate this as a large negative in the environmental category. That is the reason that this is overall a negative proposal right now, based on the staff's recommendation. It is a neutral proposal from the point of implementation. This is something that we could easily accommodate into our administrative practices for the code. And we do think this is certainly a large positive for the property owners.
If I'm understanding you correctly, the key item for us to discuss as a commission is we need to understand the flow control versus volume kind of distinctions,
Right.
and understand staff's recommendation that this particular proposal as it's written right now does not sufficiently, in your eyes, address the volume issue.
Yes, that is the staff statement.
Okay. So, I'm going to ask you to walk me through this. Which items of the recommendation are addressing volume as written right now?
If I may, Chair, I'm going to scroll back up to the first page. So specific items that we can identify in this list, for example, that would limit the volume leaving the site, would be related to this bullet here, limiting the individual lot impervious surface to 50%.
Okay.
In the R4 zone for most subdivisions, we currently allow a 70% impervious surface allowance. You have an increase in open space requirement here. This is in addition to the existing recreational space requirement. That increases of 15% of the lot area that we're talking about, 15% of the 5 acres. That 15%, part of that can accommodate the existing or the required surface water flow control facility, the level 3 flow control we've referred to. That's important to note because those flow control facilities can be quite large and in of themselves are considered impervious surface. They don't absorb water on the site. They actually hold the water in that pond and then discharge it as part of the flow control itself. So there is some staff concern over whether or not this 15% open space is a bit of a misnomer.
Did you have a question, Commissioner Collins?
Yeah, that's counted as part of the open space?
The proposal right now is that the stormwater pond could be located in the open space. Stormwater ponds, by definition, are actually impervious surface. The intent of the open space
Exactly,
would
it
be...
goes against, all right, thank you.
Okay.
I just wanted to make sure I heard that correctly.
Commissioner Coleman, did you have a question?
Yeah, just, what does staff consider to be open space besides stormwater ponds?
It's not a term we have defined in our code, so I can only respond to what we looked at when we were evaluating this particular proposal. And I think we took it in the most generous way that I could think of at the time, which is it's space that's otherwise unimproved with the exception of the specific allowance that was proposed for stormwater facilities. So presumably it would be vegetated. There's actually a part of this proposal is to revegetate, reforest it. So we would see something that would eventually be back to a forested condition, except where the stormwater pond is located.
But there's a conflict there. You're revegetating a holding pond.
Well, I don't think the holding pond would take up the entire portion of the open space that we're talking about, but it would take up a portion of it. So pardon me, it wouldn't take up the entire area.
Revegetate all open space.
Yeah, it's all, pardon me, this is, I've over-summarized in the evaluation form. It would be revegetate all open space where feasible. So
if the holding pond was 15% of the property, it wouldn't get revegetated at all.
Could put water lilies in it. Sorry.
yes, that would be true.
Continue.
The revegetation standard itself is actually a flow a volume reduction technique. So if you have existing pasturage and we're trying to reduce flow off that pasturage, revegetating it back to a foresting condition is a volume control approach. Those are the components that I'm aware of that actually reduce volume in this standard.
Okay, so I want to make sure I've captured that correctly. We've got the impervious surface limits, the revegetation, and the open space are both water quality and volume control.
Those are specifically volume control approaches that will improve presumably water quality downstream of the conveyance.
Okay. And it's staff's opinion that those are insufficient to mitigate the risk of development as proposed.
I think it's accurate to say that they would reduce volume of the stormwater leaving the site, but they're not the same as a volume standard. So a volume standard really focuses on matching the existing volume leaving the site and not having any increase in the volume from the development. This proposal would, if you'd look at a standard single-family lot, you would see, say, X amount of volume coming off that. This proposal reduces that X to some extent, but it doesn't match the original volume leaving the site.
And we're concerned about volume in this case and not in the tightline case because?
Because volume, the volume of water can essentially increase erosion potential in the man-made conveyance between the stormwater facility and the lake.
Okay, I have one more question.
Tidelines cannot.
And the evaluation that they're recommending would not mitigate that?
It would look for situations where such erosion was likely or would be prevalent using the current surface water design manual thresholds and require that we address those. It's not the same level of guarantee that you see around a tight line or a volume standard.
Okay. So I want to make sure I understand, and then I'm going to hand it over to everybody else. So we're going to reduce the volume somewhat. We do not have a volume standard, and they're proposing an evaluation of the conveyance system to determine whether or not it will handle the volume, but we're not confident that that will sufficiently prevent the risk of an unknown circumstance that was not identified in that evaluation that's peer-reviewed.
Yes, and I will note, we did get comments right up until the end of the public comment period tonight. The evaluation forms that we prepared today, or that we're reviewing today, reflect the status of the public comment through the 30th.
Okay.
So to the extent that those proposals may have changed up through 6:30 today, I would advise the Plan Commission that we need to revisit this item as part of our deliberations on the 13th.
Okay. So I'm going to start with Commissioner Collins. The question at hand is whether or not the volume control standards that have been proposed merit a large N or a small n in the environmental category. I think that's the question at hand. So if you have questions or a comment on that, please provide them now.
I appreciate the strides that the applicant is using to go forward. I cannot currently support it.
Okay, so you would, based on the information that we have right now, the large N is
correct.
Okay. Commissioner Wasserman.
Come back to me just a few minutes.
Sure. Commissioner Islam.
I would like to see the large N remains as large N. As staff had pointed out, we are really not buying much with this offer other than what's already in existence by law. And the risk management principle needs to be taken care of here. We are going from no disturbance because of the situation with downhill Lake Sammamish 309 wards listed category. So we need to have a full assurance that any volume and pollution increase is minimized. Until we have that full assurance, I think risk is too great and it stays in large N.
Okay. Commissioner Luxembourg.
I just had one quick question, and then I'll give you my opinion. Am I right, Evan, in understanding that it's the staff's viewpoint that there are many things that have been proposed, they're good things, but the result of those will be more water will still be coming off the site?
Yes, that's accurate.
I think it should say a large N.
All right. Commissioner Coleman.
This is one that I've struggled with a lot. It woke me up at 4 a.m. this morning. It was lovely. And the thing that I'm struggling with is it's not, we've addressed the erosion during construction. We've addressed the erosion post-construction. So it's really the concern of what happens from, in this particular case, the discharge point down to where that discharge feature enters the lake. And what this is proposing is that that feature would be evaluated by geotechnical engineer or hydrogeologists. Are going to look at it. They're going to evaluate the length of that feature, the amount of water coming out of the pond, and the flow control system. And they're going to say it can or it can't handle that level of water, or if it can't, these are the mitigations that we put in place. But what this doesn't do is say, well, okay, if it can handle it, like the concerns brought up before, what surety does the city have? What surety do we have that that assessment is correct, even after a peer review, which gives me some comfort that you know, I've worked on projects before where we've had to divert stormwater around a stream because that stream had erosive qualities and we could only put this much water in when we had to discharge this much. And that was accepted. Those were acceptable studies, and people were reasonable about that. So I think this can be done, but I think there needs to be a little bit more thought about how the city can address some surety, maybe a monitoring bond. And I think with something like that, this could be a small end and this could move forward.
So I'd like to hear from Commissioner Wasserman, and then I'd like to have a little bit more discussion about the slight modification that Commissioner Coleman has proposed.
I'd like to follow up on what Commissioner Coleman was saying, and this is one of the things that I guess kind of has been making me question also. You can prove that it works, and I guess I'll follow back to a LEEDS project where you monitor something for a year, and if it doesn't work in a year, you fix it or you mitigate it or you deal with it. In something like this, is there a way to, how do you determine in a year, in 2 years that, oh my gosh, it's really not what we thought it was going to do? You know, because if you're going to get a bunch of engineers, you're going to get an answer, and they're going to use their best available knowledge and math and this, that, and the other thing, and they're going to say, it works. Okay, that's good. I'm going to buy it, you're going to buy it, everybody's going to buy it, and we're all going to be happy. And then, you know, Galloping Gertie across the Point Narrows, everybody thought that worked too. So is there a monitoring system, or is there a way to, you know, if I think we could go back to a small end if you could figure out how to follow up on it somehow.
Would you like to comment on the implementability of such a proposal?
Well, I guess I have two thoughts that I would throw out to the commission for consideration. The first is that when we do see the installation of a stormwater improvement of really any type in this city as part of our standard subdivision practice, we require a financial guarantee. So what I would assume, kind of implicit in perhaps Commissioner Coleman's suggestion, is an expanded option around that. The challenge I would throw out perhaps for Commissioner Wasserman is that, say it does fail, right? Say we do start to see erosion in the armored ditch downslope. From an implementation standpoint, and frankly from a property owner standpoint, what we're typically talking about at that point is some kind of corrective action. Mm-hmm. And anticipating what that corrective action would be, I don't know, but I would observe a couple general rules of thumb. It's going to be expensive. The builder, the developer may not have planned for that kind of corrective action in their financing. It's going to be an implementation challenge, and probably a property owner challenge to correct something that has started to fail. And that leads me to maybe a third point around Commissioner Coleman's comments that I would throw out. In our internal conversations with the city staff as to why level 3 flow control isn't acceptable compared to a volume standard, assume that the stormwater facility fails, which is kind of the worst case scenario you could assume for one of these systems. When you have a failure of the stormwater facility for a level 3 flow control, all of the water leaving that facility is going into the armored ditch, or whatever the man-made conveyance might be. And typically the modeling doesn't get to kind of a full failure, what that means for the erosion downstream. It might, we could build that into this system, but you're talking about a lot of water suddenly going down the man-made conveyance. And your risk around that suddenly causing a large erosion event in a big storm is increased. If we're talking about a volume standard, if the stormwater pond fails, you're still not seeing an increase in the volume leaving the site during a big storm event. And so you have just a reduced amount of risk around kind of the catastrophic failure. Whether these are compelling to the Planning Commission, that's of course up to you to decide.
Thank you. Commissioner Wasserman, did you have any further questions? Commissioner Collins?
I'm good.
Commissioner Islam?
This one strikes me that there are certain situations you just don't take risks, and this is one of those. We can provide financial disincentive for the proponent not to cause a situation, but after the fact, financial situation would not help the degraded water quality in Lake Sammamish. We are really protecting the whole reason no disturbance zone, again, is the quality and the hazard, erosion hazard that creates. So in my mind, this is really a difficult one. How do you come up with some measures that will give you the assurance when, if things don't work, you have already taken the effect of it, environment has already degraded, and that's the very risk no disturbance zone was supposed to prevent. So I kind of don't see a way around of it, but what I see though is that we are very much focusing on an engineering solution, and looks like everything in the world has an engineering solution. I myself is an engineer too, but at the same time I would say that this is where we need to think really innovatively, figure out, do we really need to allow development in those areas? Are there other ways to provide financial benefit for the homeowners, property owners in that area? Do we need to introduce land use options, TDR, high density in safer areas? I just feel like we are following a very narrow path of engineering solution, and we are stuck with whatever engineering solution best available today.
Commissioner Luxembourg?
No.
So Commissioner Coleman and Commissioner Luxembourg, I'm not quite clear on your, I want to make sure that I didn't track who said what. Are you both saying that at this point in time, the way it's written, or even with this additional financial guarantee, you would still consider this a large N?
No, I wouldn't.
Okay.
If we could look at some other mitigations like that, I think we could
move it.
We could make it a small N.
Okay, and I'm hearing from Commissioner Collins and Commissioner Islam that at this point we haven't heard of any additional mitigation that would move it in sufficiently.
The surety that I'd be looking for is that if there was some type of not catastrophic failure, but moderate failure, that a tight line solution would be had, period. Okay? I don't see any way that that could be a guarantee.
Okay. Commissioner Luxembourg and Commissioner Wasserman, go ahead.
I indicated I was a large N.
Okay, thank you. And Commissioner Wasserman.
I believe I'd follow Commissioner Coleman. If we could come up with a way like this, I think I could go to small N.
Chair, if I may interject for a moment. I understand there's some material that came in just in the past few hours today. My recommendation to the Planning Commission is that you hold off on your final decision on this form until next week.
20 minutes.
I apologize for not saying that 20 minutes ago.
Okay, so I will summarize. What I'm hearing is that at least 2 commissioners, and I will put myself in this bucket, so I will say at least 3 commissioners tonight are willing to consider the possibility of shifting this to a small N if we can find a way to either mitigate the impacts of a failure, or if someone has proposed in the recent comments some other way for us to reduce the risk further. I suspect all of the commissioners would be open to considering that input as well. So if I get some head nods from everyone, I think I will put a hold on this discussion for now. As it stands, the form stands with a large N and a negative based on the input from tonight, but we will remain open to considering the other public comment that was provided prior to the deadline. Are we good with that, Commissioner Collins?
I don't know if you want to term it public comment or staff comment on what's already
Commissioner
been-
Collins, I'm sorry, can you speak into the mic?
I don't know the proper way to term it. It may, our cutoff time has happened, so it could be staff's review of the public comment.
Correct. We would like staff to review the public comment that's been provided through the deadline and provide us with an updated form if there are actual changes that address this particular topic. Commissioner Islam?
I think I know the answer, but I'm going to ask it to verify that. Whatever public comments we have received until 6:30 tonight, that's what will be evaluated by staff.
Correct.
And I am hoping that we don't use our precious time on things that are not substantive, so staff has to review and come up with something really groundbreaking, and then it becomes an issue for us. I just wanted to preserve the limited time we have.
Yeah, we'll actually talk about that a little bit more when we get to the deliberation items, but I believe that's the intent, yes.
Yes.
If there are administrative changes that will not merit reconsideration. Okay, so we're going to move on from F and go to G. Whew, and I will note that it's 8 o'clock. That's okay, we knew these were the tough ones.
And pardon me for the technical delay here. While we,
You're not helping.
I thought Carl was the hard one.
It will be next time.
So 415G is the last evaluation form for us to look at tonight. And this is essentially a modification, again, to what was identified as 415D, the pilot program. And it includes two components. The first is essentially a modest increase in the number of projects that could be considered eligible under the pilot program, in particular for subdivisions. What we have here is an increase from 6 pilot projects to 9 pilot projects. 3 of those would be subdivisions that can tightline directly to the lake. 3 of those would be subdivisions that will use, for example, a low-impact development approach to accomplish volume control. And then 3 short plats, short subdivisions, so 9 lots or less, using one of those 2 approaches for dealing with stormwater. This is essentially a it does not affect the overall rating of the original pilot program, so we do not expect the modest increase in the number of pilot projects to negatively affect the environment in a risk management way. Pardon me, a moment ago I failed to mention this also includes a proposal for the 60% phosphorus removal. And a moment ago we talked about 60% or more as an approach, and while we were discussing another item, it was brought to my attention that that's actually part of the proposal that's in front of you tonight. 60% or more, if technically feasible, is already built into the code for you tonight. So this does rate as an overall positive amendment, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Let's start with Commissioner Collins.
I agree.
Commissioner Collins agrees. Commissioner
support.
Wasserman.
Well, I agree, but no questions yet.
Okay, Commissioner Islam.
Number of questions. Sorry for taking the time. I will be quick. The first one, we are increasing, you characterize modest numbers, but that's actually 1/3 increase of the total 6 to 9.
Sure.
So that very increase puts me to say that N has to move toward further N direction, which is a large N. Then there are a number of improvements I would like to see that will make this pilot program better. Starting with our purpose here is to find a way to allow development without adversely impacting Lake Sammamish water quality. But we have not defined what adversely impacting means. Is it from the current existing water quality conditions to further degrading? So I think that should be somewhere pointed out as a baseline situation in the code or in the conditions. I think the project development period, or project, application period for 3 years is a good idea, but I do like to see a project completion period. The whole reason to me is that it's a pilot program. We like to see the data so that we can make a bigger decision, or City Council can make a bigger decision. If someone does not develop for a number of years, there is nothing in those regulations will force them to develop. They would not abandon, but they would simply not develop. So I would like to see that we move to perhaps a 5-year limitation for someone to be able to develop the area, and we have the data to verify the pilot program. I see that monitoring is only as allowed by NPDES permit requirement. NPDES basically is looking at turbidity monitoring during the construction, but we are really comparing with water quality at the lake level. So at the water quality at the lake level, there are a whole number of pollutants that we should be looking at. I suggest that monitoring program should be bumped up to compare apple to apple. I think Chair is trying to say.
I actually apologize for the interruption. What I'd like to do, I don't know all of your comments, so what I'd like to do is if we have specifics about the implementation of the pilot, I'd like to cover that in deliberation. Yeah. Okay, so if the number is definitely something that we should discuss here because that's part of the recommendation, but the details of the pilot program, such as the duration and things like that, I think we can cover during deliberation.
I'll hold off. So
please raise any other comments that you have related.
I think I made my comment about sticking with a large end because simply we are increasing the potential for more pollution by 3 more. And other comments I think will help make it better regulation. So I will hold up until we get to the point.
Thank you. So I just want to recap real quickly. The shift from 6 to 9 projects total, you feel is substantial enough to shift this from a small end to a large end?
It is a 30-40% increase.
Okay. Commissioner Luxembourg.
I wanted to ask a question. I get confused when we talk about how risk increases. Certainly what Commissioner Islam said is correct. It's a 1/3 increase. Or you could say it's a 50% increase if you want to look at it that way, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean that the risk goes up 50%. It's the question is in this program with the controls that we have on it, what is that doing to risk? And if you could give us a comment on that, that would help me.
Well, I think the staff assessment was that there might be some shift in the environmental risk here, but it's not to the point where we'd call it a large N. And this is where we perhaps differ with Commissioner Islam. There is an increase, I think it's fair to say. Going back to our 3 ways we're managing risk right now, kind of during site construction, water before it leaves the site and water after it leaves the site. The projects that we're talking about, be it 6 or 9, will comply with kind of the risk management tools we've identified in all 3 categories as rating positive. So in that regard, the number of projects really doesn't increase risk in a way that I could foresee. What it does perhaps increase risk around is the number of projects that we're overseeing to make sure that they meet the standards that we've specified, especially during site construction. Whether this is an implementation component or an environmental component to our analysis is up to the Planning Commission. But what we're talking about is perhaps 2 or more projects open that we're managing and we're monitoring for kind of mechanical control around the risk, erosion sediment control on the site. That would be one nuance. A second nuance would be we are talking about a pilot program. So we are trying to test out some ideas, but not kind of open it up free flow to development in general. So that's the balancing component to is it 6, is it 9? What we wouldn't want is perhaps a proposal that says all of the projects in this kind of category don't even need to be part of the pilot program, they're just allowed by right. That would go too far, and that's essentially where we drew the line with the proponent for this proposal in our conversations between the 16th and the 30th.
Commissioner Islam, does that sufficiently address your concern or no at this point?
It doesn't. I see a point of view of difference. What I hear you, Evan, saying that increasing the number of projects does not increase or does not significantly increase the risk because your inherent assumption is that there is already good control in place. if I take that assumption, then I would be saying what you just concluded. Why are we even bothering with a pilot project if we believe it's so good,
Right.
best thing in the world, then let it be built.
And the way this played out in the discussion between the city and the proponent for this amendment is we actually started to rate this proposal as a small N for implementation, because we were starting to move away from a pilot program and into something that was more allowing for development by right for certain types of development categories. And at the end, they modified their proposal to be the one you see tonight.
But that's not an environmental issue, that's an implementation issue. I'm strictly talking from the environmental standpoint. If your belief is that it's well controlled and number of projects don't necessarily add significantly, then that's why I'm commenting and saying that pilot scale program is not even appropriate, if that's what the assumption you have.
If you had unlimited resources, then there would be no need for a pilot because we're confident in the controls from an environmental perspective. Is that a true or a false statement?
I'm afraid that's a false statement.
Go on.
I'm not necessarily disagreeing with Commissioner Islam's assessment that there is some increase to the environmental effect risk here as well. The way we focused on this is we went back to the state law guidance of when you're trying out something where the best available science is not clear, you essentially use a managed approach to that. You test it out, see how it works, and then you think about making a more permanent change. I provided that guidance from the state law, I think, a meeting or two ago. So I think there is a modest increase here. We felt as a staff recommendation that was a still in the small negative category, not a large N, and I would stand by that. But I think this is a gradient, not a full Boolean type test.
Any further comment, Commissioner Islam?
Probably not anything to add substantively. I will stand by with my comment. Pilot scale project, 6 project versus 9 project versus 12 project. It all has to do with at what point we can say we have adequate data to evaluate a program. So it is a statistical measurement really. And I would rather hear some discussions about, 2 project is not enough, 4 project is enough, and this is why.
Okay. Commissioner Luxembourg?
I guess I had one more question. Am I remembering correctly that in addition to the number of projects, they're controlled by time? So many per year?
Yeah, the current proposal actually does limit the number of project starts per year, I believe, and I'd want to verify that in the code, but I think that's accurate.
It seems to me that when you have a pilot project, you put in place the controls that you need in order to put your toe in the water and make sure it's making sense. And so I appreciate the way this has been done, and I would say that I'm in agreement with the thing as rated.
Commissioner Coleman?
I agree with the form.
Okay. So we have one commissioner that's advocating for a large N instead of a small N. Commissioner Collins?
One really divergent point, though, I'd like to bring up is that I do support Mobubel's discussion about alternatives to subdivision. Come on, it's right there. If there's a way to develop a Z home and it meets for the what? Okay. If there was an ability to put a Z home project on one of these lots and it met the zoning criteria for a number of units for the acreage, it's easier to control, it's easier to manage. The number of feet of impervious surface can be reduced, and you can rainwater harvest the thing a lot easier. So alternatives to subdivision, I think, would be great. There is no provision for that currently.
Are you proposing another alternative?
Actually, it was Mububel's idea.
Okay. Other people now. Let's talk about this.
So he really prompts me to say something. I have proposed something that hasn't caught fire yet, which is moving away from an engineering solution to look for land use-based solution, move away from constructing in a constrained zone to the areas where you have less impact. So it will require expansion of TDR, expansion of density. So I see a way to really do this. I'm just not hopeful that it is going to be done through an engineering solution.
We feel much better now that that's out of our systems.
So that sounds like another alternative for us to consider, is what it, honestly, it sounds like to me. Evan, do you understand what's being suggested?
Well, and let me make sure, if I may, Chair. So the city of Sammamish, of course, does currently have a transfer of development rights program in effect. Sending sites in the erosion hazard near sensitive water body overlay, it can currently be identified and could sell TDRs. I think the accurate statement is that those TDRs currently can only be sold to development in the town center as a tool. And so what I hear perhaps Commissioner Collins and Islam referring to is broadening that TDR program to perhaps allow for development at the bottom of the hill.
Okay.
Or somewhere else where there's not a drainage issue. Respectfully, that begins to be outside of the current set of issues that we're really discussing tonight, not weighing in one way or another. But
So I'd like to propose that we add that to the list of parking lot items that we forward on to the council for consideration, because it is outside the scope of our ECA review, but we don't want to lose sight of the fact that that is an alternative that we would like the council to consider giving us direction to maybe expand in the future.
Yes,
You guys
TDR and
comfortable
increase
with
of
that?
density. Increase of density could be independent of TDR, allowing higher density in some places.
Okay, great.
Agreed.
Okay, so have you captured that?
I have, Chair. May I correct one thing I said a moment ago, which was not quite accurate, which is I think I noted that there was a limit on the number of seasonal starts per year. That actually has been dropped in this last version.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. Commissioner Coleman.
Well, I was just wondering if we could pile on to the list of other good ideas. Or maybe I can just email you guys separately, because it's kind of, like you said, it's outside of, okay, I'll just do that.
Either would be fine, sir.
Okay. Please share Commissioner Coleman's other good ideas with the rest of us when you receive them. But I appreciate your being willing to not spend more time on that tonight. Okay, great. We are keeping track of those parking lot items, and we will be forwarding them to the council, so that's very good. Okay. So we have large N, small n. I'm hearing a consensus around, not a unanimous consensus, but a consensus around the form as it stands currently. So with that, we will proceed with 415G as it's currently written, with a note that this was not a unanimous decision. Okay. Now it is 8:20, and the next item on our agenda is deliberation. I would like to propose to the commission that we at least go through one item tonight, so that we have some practice and experience and can see how long these items will take potentially, so that that can be input to our planning for our next meeting. I also hear a request for a brief break, so I will be happy to honor that request. Let's take a brief pause. We will go back. We'll start at 8:25. We will go through at least the first major item on the list, as well as the presentation about the deliberation process, and see how it goes. Okay, thank you. Break.
Thank you, Debbie. Yes. Yeah, I just got. Here's the list. Flabbergasted.
Go through all of the process.
Well, I understand. Like the first two
It's not hard, is it?
I'm just saying, we should do more.
Do the first two. We will cover that in the process. Thank you.
All right, so I'm done with the flash drive.
What is that, a challenge?
Reed, was that a white flag?
I asked him to bring a white. All right.
The coaches challenge us. Challenge us.
No. Oh, very good. Thank you. I promised that we would cover something particularly, and I said, you need to call me if I don't address it.
The light on it?
Yes.
Good.
Well, I may have a accident.
That took a lot longer than I thought. That was kind of crazy.
So, no change to the forms.
But one, right?
Essentially got kicked down the road.
Quick question?
Yes.
What does recommend adoption of that draft mean?
So is Petco going to be on that corner?
It's essentially
It's under
giving them a
construction
starting
now?
point for.
What's going to be in the A's? Do we have that
Adoption
figured out
only in the
yet?
sense that they're going to use it as a reference?
As a starting point for their eventual review.
I thought Petco was
Yeah, and
gonna do that.
I debated that even when I wrote it, because what it includes
That's what I
is
thought I
everything,
heard.
right? And then they're going to go through, first the major items.
Better location.
Oh, yeah, I read the
minor
rest of
items.
it.
Okay, yeah, so I
They look real good.
don't take it as too far. And I am sorry we couldn't meet to talk. I honestly got,
All right, Teddy, come on, do it. My kids are wrestling across the street. Well, my kids. My son's wrestling across, actually, over here.
You going to be able to get there in time?
No, he's up next. I've already had 2 matches tonight. I've already missed the first one. And he's next. I got a 150-pounder up next, and he's up next. We'll see. Hopefully.
I feel good. Once in a while I get some support, right?
I like alternatives.
No, I'm fine on my own. But thank you for
you don't want
finding-
support,
No, that's good.
they would have talked about
Do
it.
it independently. If you feel free, do it.
I do. My problem is I'm really foggy-headed right now, and she's looking at me like I'm not making sense. I got no idea. Thank you.
I'm glad that you decided to.
All right, bells or the trees or the stars, the one to have?
This is all we've been waiting for, right? All year.
Yeah, going for it to be there.
yeah, the stars are a little.
There's actually a little
She's touched it.
Dang it.
A very symbolic snack.
Very,
Minimizing this, minimizing that.
Kathy, you want to go through the form and then the code, is that, am I understanding it correctly? Okay, and then we'll go PowerPoint form code, PowerPoint form.
I think it's
And you're going to
much
sponsor
harder,
deliberations.
much harder to match.
And that's where I want to start.
Yes, and I'll stay out of your way.
And I'm like, holy crap, I gotta get through this fast.
Like feel, it is to me.
Sorry, that took me.
No, you know what? Me too, but it was good. Better than most common. You ready? You got your badge? Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, where's your badge?
Whoa, I got so
We don't know who you are.
flustered there at the end. I just kind of ran in here. Is that going okay?
That we may not get done next week.
As if that's going to do anything. It's still impervious.
We can have it like a weekend.
I'm not going to be here.
First, have a nice Thanksgiving.
Nice, how was yours?
He actually got
It was fantastic. We ran a walk off to our little log cabin, and I picked up a turkey dinner from Granite.
Oh, yeah? I just want to make sure.
I'm like, I can't make it dinner now because it was too good. So that will be new soon.
I always get my turkeys from Fisher's as well. And you got a over 14-pound bird. Branded. My son, 4-year-old, had turkey. He asked for more. And just kind of like, my lab was just kind of,
Who are you? Yeah.
yeah. He didn't want to touch anything else. But yeah, mashed potatoes or anything like that. But he was eating the turkey.
That's great.
What do you like apple pie, right?
No, I can't remember. Oreos or something. My parents?
Spoil your kids.
I think they missed that memo.
They missed that memo? Oh, okay.
Christmas is going to be different this year.
One that bothers me, my wife and I got together, so, you know, grandchildren, you would have them first.
It's very cute.
The entire weekend, getting either one of my parents to interact with my boys was like I had to sit them down and say, okay, we're here for 2 more days.
I like competition.
You want to play
Environmental competition.
That's a good time.
Really?
Yeah.
Do they not know what to do with them because they're so little?
Thank you.
I mean, because I'm that way. Like, if you give me a 2-year-old, it'll be like,
They'll lead you.
I have noticed that. That's true.
A 2-year-old will just do what he wants to do. You know, my oldest, he'll say, let's play football. You know, he'll want to throw the football. My dad's like, don't throw the ball in the house. And I'm like, this is freaking wrestling. Okay.
What's it going to be?
That's interesting.
Oh, thank you.
About page 8 in the book there.
Waiting for Evan.
Which book?
He went to the bathroom.
Newspaper.
I want you to know it's on the record.
I did have a cookie. I'm like, what the heck?
That's
You
yours?
didn't have any dinner on the bottom line.
No.
Well, that's
Hey!
I had some
it's on the mat right now.
I haven't done my exercise today.
I'm missing lots of down
I
to one
record, I
first
didn't
round
go to work today just to be able to read this.
No, I went.
He's already wrestled
Stop going to work.
Garfield tonight, and that guy in the first round.
Oh, it's a tournament?
Just a 2-night.
Because, I mean, this is important to me. I mean, just to do.
Okay, I think we're ready.
They're all that way past. He's got 2 opponents. He wrestled Garfield first, and that son wrestles Stein.
I think we got it. Okay, so now we're going to start. Am I on? Is that the problem? Better? Okay.
Better.
Thank you, Debbie. So now we're going to commence our deliberations, and I need to make sure I am on the right version of my notes. So we're going to actually talk about the process as a group, make sure we understand the process that we're going to go through, and then we'll start. So we do need to focus our discussion on the policy as shown in the evaluation forms, and then look at the code language and confirm that the code language reflects the policy that we've decided. And that's where, if there are implementation details, as Commissioner Islam mentioned, for example, around the pilot program, we would have an opportunity to discuss those details. Exactly. Please endorse points made previously rather than repeating them to kind of move this process along quickly. Offer alternatives if you believe a change is necessary. We will be following Robert's rules for amendments, and we'll go through that in a little bit more detail. But essentially, an amendment needs to be, there needs to be a motion for the amendment, and it needs to be seconded. Then we will have discussion, and then we will vote. And like I said, we'll go through that in a little bit more detail. We do need to specifically be mindful of any amendments that might change the overall rating. And we'll actually look to staff to kind of point those things out. We don't want to, go through all of this process of coming up with a change that's positive just to undo it with our amendments. That's not the intent of the deliberation process. So the steps that we're going to go through is the vice chair will make a motion to adopt the deliberation draft that was published last week. I will ask for a second to the motion, and I would like one commissioner to please second it. At that point, the deliberation draft is on the table. And we will go through the major items in the order that's been published in the memo that went out and that we'll go through in the PowerPoint today. So we will vote on each of the major items that are positive, and then we will look at the code and make sure that there are no changes or tweaks that we need to make to the code. So again, the vice chair will make a motion for the first item. I will ask for a second, and someone will provide a second. I would expect most of the items to be seconded. If you do not believe that the recommendation should be implemented, don't second it. If a recommendation does not receive a second, we will not discuss it any further. Is that clear?
What does that mean? Discussion not further, meaning we don't proceed with this?
Means we don't proceed with it. So, for example, if there's a particular amendment or that a particular recommendation that we have discussed in great detail and it rates a positive, if that does not receive a second, we're done with it.
It does.
It dies. Is that clear? I don't expect many things to die at that level, but I want to make sure that we're clear about that. Once something gets seconded, we will go through kind of in order about comments about supporting or not supporting or clarifying questions. At that point, I want that to keep that at the policy level, okay? I don't know that we'll have a lot of discussion at the policy level since we've already had a lot of it, but then we'll take a vote on the policy item and then we'll go into the detail if it's approved. So far, so good? Okay. Once it's passed, then we'll go into the specific code and technical changes. I do want to make sure there are probably some wordsmithing things that should be done. If a section of the code is frankly not clear, let's talk about that a little bit. I want to avoid wordsmithing as a group. I am happy with giving staff the direction. We understand the intent of the code. It's not yet meeting our standards for clarity. Please provide us with some alternative language. We don't have to make up the alternative language as a group. Is that clear? Okay. We've already talked about this. We'll go through the proposed amendments. We've got the Roberts rules, and here is the order of deliberation. Now, I have a couple of notes that I want to share with you all. The commissioners actually have this on a handout that was provided earlier. This is kind of a quick reference sheet. Covers the information that I just walked everyone through. It's certainly going to be a reference sheet that I will use. But there are a couple of notes that I'll make. I will use my consensus check authority to kind of help us manage the discussion and hopefully avoid it from drifting unnecessarily. If a member of the public believes that staff has relayed something inaccurate or factually misstated an item, the Deputy Director of Community Development, Susan Cesar, has volunteered to be the contact for the public. I want to make sure that if we're operating on the basis of a factually incorrect statement, please point that out to Susan. She'll talk with you outside, and then we will, determine how to handle the particular issue. I will note that depending on what the item is, we may or may not come back to it tonight. Obviously, there's not a lot that we will cover tonight, so, but that's the process that we've identified for, making sure that we're not operating under an incorrect statement of fact. I also want to note that we have received substantial public input relatively late in the process, including some handouts that were provided tonight that are not yet posted on the website. So we would like staff and commissioners to review that public comment. And any items that are substantive in nature will be discussed at our next meeting, but there will be some rules. If we've already made a decision about a particular item, so tonight we're going to talk about fee in lieu. If we receive some input about fee in lieu that we haven't considered, that a commissioner thinks merits consideration after we've already made a decision about fee in lieu, commissioner or staff needs to make that known to the rest of the commission. If the commission by majority vote agrees that we need to take that input into consideration, we will reopen the item for discussion. But it has to be a majority vote by the commission. Is that clear? Okay. I believe we are ready for the first item. Commissioner Luxembourg.
I would like to make a motion that we consider the Planning Commission deliberation draft.
Do we have a second? Oh, come on, I second it. Thank you.
So if nobody says yes, we just go home, right?
Right.
I'll second.
I shouldn't have made that so clear. Thank you, Commissioner Wasserman. All right, with that,
I I would like to make a motion that we consider the first item, which is
Wait.
2-8B, fee in lieu mitigation for streams.
Shouldn't we vote on the motion?
No, we don't vote until the very end on the whole thing.
Discuss.
Aha.
Okay.
So,
He's thinking we should have voted saying we agreed, which is probably right.
okay, so Commissioner Luxembourg has moved that we discuss 2-8B. Do we have a second? No one wants to consider fee in lieu.
I second.
Thank you. With that, please take us through fee in lieu.
So fee in lieu, I'm going to pull up first the evaluation form. You'll see on the screen before you tonight, I've put in a reference, of course, to the page numbers in the deliberation draft that will go through each page just to clarify any questions you may have.
Okay.
I've preloaded the forms this time so we don't have the slight technical delay we had before. Remind the Planning Commission, this is an item that came out of our public comment. We're looking at allowing for fee in lieu mitigation for both streams and, in a moment, wetlands. This is rated as a neutral overall for, as neutral for environmental effect, implementation effect, and as a small positive for the property owner effect, which results in an overall positive rating for this particular amendment. With that, I'll hop into the specific code, if I may.
Actually, will you scroll up to the top? Nope, not that
page?
top. That top. Thank you. So the actual policy change doesn't get into the specifics of the code change, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so what I'd like to do is make sure that we have a brief discussion and a vote on the policy item in general, and that is to add fee in lieu as an alternative for mitigation. So with that, Commissioner Collins, comments?
I support fee in lieu. The ratios are dependent on staff to come up with them. They can be mitigated or changed at any time. I think it's a great system. I think it's the way of the future.
Great. Commissioner Wasserman.
I think I'd have to agree with Commissioner Collins.
Commissioner Islam.
I'll support it as it is.
Commissioner Luxembourg.
I agree.
Commissioner Coleman.
I agree.
I also agree. With that, I would like to actually propose we have a vote on the policy item and then go through the code. So, Commissioner Collins, yea or nay?
Yay.
Wasserman?
Yay.
Islam?
Yeah.
Luxembourg?
Yay.
Coleman?
Yes.
Yes. So 7-0, the policy change.
6-0.
6-0. Oh, sorry. I can't count tonight. Thank you. Now, if you point us out to the code, what I'd like the commissioners to do is look at pages 14 and 15. And I'm going to actually, is that correct?
Bottom. Yeah.
On page 16.
Yeah, 14, 15, and 52.
The bottom of page 14 and the top of page 15. And then page 52. And I will start with Commissioner Collins. Do you have any questions, changes, or changes for any of these components of the code?
I support the components of the code.
Commissioner Wasserman.
I would support the components.
Commissioner Islam.
I will support too.
Commissioner Luxembourg.
I agree with the other commissioners.
Okay, Commissioner Coleman.
I have a concern with the word feasible.
On what page?
Sorry.
Do you mean page 14?
I think it's on 14, yeah.
And what is your concern?
Lots of things are feasible, but not practical or reasonable. So,
Will you please provide us with the technical definition of feasible?
Feasible on the
We don't have one on the code.
can I offer a humorous example?
No
Oh.
wordsmithing.
I'd rather, can you offer an alternative?
Reasonable.
You would like to replace the word feasible with reasonable.
Trying to stay away from wordsmithing, but
We may have a feasible definition in the code already.
Okay, so,
okay. If it is defined, I may pick at that later.
okay, so let's take a moment for staff to provide us with the definition of feasible, and we'll come back to that, yes?
Okay.
Okay, so we're going to actually move on to the next fee in lieu, which is 3-8. Sorry, 3-3, go ahead.
I move that we consider 3-3B, fee in lieu mitigation for wetlands.
Do we have a second?
I second.
Great, discussion. Commissioner Collins? Do we need discussion? Let me start with
I
that. Does
don't
anybody
need
have
any
any discussion for this item?
I don't have any.
Perfect. Then I will call it to a vote on the policy item. Commissioner Collins?
Support.
Commissioner Wasserman?
Support.
Commissioner Islam?
Support.
Commissioner Luxembourg?
Support.
Commissioner Coleman?
Yes.
I say yes as well. 6-0, we move forward with fee in lieu for wetlands. Will you point out the pages for that to us as well? 14, 15, 52, they're the same. Is that correct?
Pardon me, Chair, I need to double check the last page number there, page 52.
Oh, okay.
I think there might be a typo in the PowerPoint, and I'm just double checking the page that the wetland.
Okay,
fee
so I
and
presume
mitigation
that we have
is
the
allowed.
same question for 14, 15, reasonable versus feasible.
Well, yeah.
All right.
Doesn't count on this one.
Did you have another question?
Well, what I'm
Commissioner
looking at
Coleman?
is the fee in lieu is sub-bullet 9 on page 16.
Hold on.
Chair, before we get into the code, if I can take us back to the definition of feasible for just one moment.
Yes.
We do have a definition of feasible in our code right now under section 21A.50.
What page?
No, it's in 25. This is actually the SMP definition of
Yeah,
feasible.
I wondered.
We're
I
still
remember
hunting
that
it
one,
down.
yeah.
Bear with us.
That's all right.
Big black book of dictionary.
That I know we don't have a definition?
We don't have it in the ECA, we have it in the SMP. I think we should probably report it to you. We can send it out by email and everybody can see it. But why don't we read it? If it's something we want to include as an ECA definition, I think that's fine, or make them somehow applicable to both.
Now, let's hear it.
I think you're going to be okay with it, my sense is, because I think it'll address the issue that I think you're concerned about.
Okay.
But we'll see how good my crystal ball is. Do you want to just read it for him? Did somebody have it?
No, we don't have it yet.
You had it in your computer. It's right there. Just close the loop on this.
I ran away scared.
It's all right. Okay, so the definition of feasible in the Shoreline Master Program that we're proposing to adopt into the ECA. Feasible means an action such as a development project, mitigation, or preservation requirement meets all the following conditions. A, the action can be accomplished with technologies and methods that have been used in the past in similar circumstances, or studies or tests have demonstrated in similar circumstances that such approaches are currently available and likely to achieve the intended results. B, the action provides a reasonable likelihood of achieving its intended purpose. And C, the action does not physically preclude achieving the project's primary intended legal use. In cases where these guidelines require certain actions unless they are infeasible, the burden of proving infeasibility is on the applicant. In determining an action's infeasibility, the reviewing agency may weigh the action's relative public costs and public benefits considered in the short and long-term timeframes. And there's a reference to the Washington Administrative Code related to Shoreline Master Programs.
Okay. Does that address your specific concern with the term?
Yeah, that's fine.
Does anyone else have any comments or questions?
Nice job, everybody, with the SMP.
Yes, all right. I will note for the record that the definition of feasible does not consider the financial implications. I
But
just
that's
wanted to
relative-
note that
That's relative, though,
for the record. That's all.
relative to the person, I guess, though.
Yes.
Correct. I just wanted to note it. That's all. Okay, so, Commissioner Coleman did point out that there is a reference to fee in lieu on page 16. It's item number 9 on rows 15 through 18. Just for the record. Does anyone, go ahead.
And pardon me, the previous slide related to the stream fee in lieu section referenced page 52. It's actually page 68 for streams. Page 52 is the wetland fee in lieu mitigation.
Okay. Rows 3 through 11 of page 68. Do any commissioners have any other questions or proposed changes to the code that's related to the 2 fee in lieu policy changes that have been adopted? Seeing none, we have just finished our first 2.
Sorry.
Commissioner Coleman.
Yeah, I wanted to go back. So on page 16,
Yeah.
lines 15 through 18, is that part of the fee in lieu? It says fee in lieu program.
Yes. What's your what?
Well, the last phrase confuses me because it says, and also the requirements of the fee in lieu mitigation program to be utilized. Is that relating back to page 68? That's just streams.
I think it refers to like King County's fee in lieu program. It just specifies which one we're using, isn't it?
Right. So this particular section says that you have to meet some variety of requirements around a critical area study, complying with the applicable program, be it stream or wetland, and then, complying with the applicable Sammamish regulations, be it for stream or wetlands, and any program-specific regulations. So we're thinking of participating right now in the King County Fee in Lieu Mitigation Program. That program has specific requirements that we need to comply with.
Got it. Thank you.
Maybe you could just add the word specific. Requirements of the specific fee in lieu program to be utilized. That might be a very minor administrative edit that I'm proposing and I'm spending our time on, but I will suggest that for staff's consideration. Okay, any other comments or discussion about the details of the fee in lieu program as implemented within the proposed code? Seeing none, I would like to propose that we continue for a few more. If you're all up for it.
Okay. I propose that we consider, I got to get the right page here, item number 213C, Alternative Wildlife Protection Approach.
Chair,
Yes.
I'm sorry, did you call a vote on that last item?
I did. You might have been out of the room. The vote was 6-0.
Pardon me.
Do you have the page, Mike?
We need a second.
Second.
Okay, great. Now we have a second. So we're going to look at the form first and then go to the page numbers.
This, of course, is the alternative wildlife protection approach that we've proposed instead of the wildlife habitat corridors. We've previously reviewed this.
Why don't you show us the other page that has the, the thing
summary of the
describes what it
requirements.
does. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
good.
So what this does is it essentially focuses us on a site-by-site analysis of wildlife habitat connectivity rather than focusing on some older wildlife habitat corridors that were mapped by King County many years ago.
Great. Commissioner Collins, comments?
On a whole, I support. I don't know on specific species.
Do we have specific species called out in this particular version of the recommendation?
No, that approach rated negatively.
Okay, great. Thank you. Commissioner Wasserman.
I would support it as written.
Commissioner Islam?
I did not support back then when we had discussion, primarily because 2.1 and 2.2 were not considered, which was supposed to define species of concern. Without species of concern, I feel this is inadequate. And also, the width of the
Corridor?
corridor has been very limited, not as best available science asked us to increase that corridors width side. So I don't support for those reasons.
Could you please comment on the corridor width? Has it changed with this proposal?
Per se, I don't believe that the corridor width is,
I am relating to perhaps 2.2, item 2.2, where best available science suggested to increase the corridor width. Since we have, and of course I was not supportive of, but since the full commission has only allowed 2.13 to go and not 2.1 and 2.2 to go, I feel 2.13 did not cover all the essence of protection, increasing the width and the number of species. Therefore, alternative approach as a whole does not have enough flavor for me to support.
Okay, I want to make sure I'm understanding. So the recommendation that we will be voting on in a moment does not increase the width above what's in the current code. However, a previous version of this recommendation did propose greater widths for specific species. Is that your understanding, Commissioner Islam?
A greater width in general, and then to identify specific
Okay.
species.
Thank you for clarifying for me your comment. Commissioner Luxembourg.
I'm in support.
Commissioner Coleman.
I support it as written.
I also support it as written. I think I appreciate staff's efforts to improve, in general, how we're providing protection, given that what was in the existing code was not particularly well-suited to our specific circumstances. So with that, I will call a vote. Commissioner Collins?
Yes.
Commissioner Wasserman?
Yes.
Commissioner Islam? Commissioner Luxembourg?
Yes.
Commissioner Coleman?
Yes.
And I say yes as well. So we have a 5-1 for alternative wildlife protection. Now we get to look at lots of code. So we're going to start on page 55, I believe. And we're looking for things that are marked 213.
yes. So on page 55, of course, that's in line 18 and 19. So to expand on that just a little bit, what we've done here is we've specified where the current species of concern are identified, and this is actually coming from the Department of Fish and Wildlife. We have not expanded that list, as Commissioner Islam spoke to a moment ago. We've incorporated the backyard wildlife habitat programs into both sections 325 and 327. So on page 56, I believe this is now, line 19 and, line 9 and 10 has that specific cross-reference. This is part of 213. We have cross-references, so we have two sections we're essentially dealing with here. One is specific to fish and wildlife habitat conservation areas, which are specific areas identified during a development proposal. The other is looking at the connectivity or the corridor. This, again, has a cross-reference to the corridor requirement. That's on line 23 of page 56. I'm going to skip past the reference to woody debris. That's not part of this amendment. And we move down into the bottom of page 57, our specific language around wildlife habitat corridors, starting on line 27 and continuing.
Oh, slow down. Sorry.
So starting on line 27, this is that new heavily revised section, we might say, related to fish and wildlife habitat corridors, starting on line 27 here and continuing on to the next pages.
So, Evan, on that code note for 327 part that we are on, I don't recall when we went through the table, evaluation table, there were enough specificity for us to understand high habitat score of equal to 29, and then located within 200 feet of stream. I wanted to ask you where those numbers are coming from and what are the justifications for, let's say, I would give an example, let's say, why 200 feet, why not going 300 feet? There must be some reference somewhere it's coming from.
So the commission may recall, we had a number of comments from our consultant related to this set of discussion items. One of those was in particular related to kind of high-quality, high-value features, and in particular encouraging connections from high-value streams, for example, to high-value wetlands. The habitat score of 29, that is a good indicator of high-value wetland criteria. The 200-foot reference actually is tied again to primarily the wetland buffer requirement that goes along with a high habitat score. So be it a Category 1 or Category 2 wetland, you're typically seeing something where within 200 feet you're going to have a buffer area that's going to constrain much of that, if not all of that 200 foot of distance. So if you're thinking of a large value, or high value rather, wetland here and a high value stream somewhere else in the development proposal, if they're within 200 feet of that area, usually that's going to be already a constrained space. We're going to have buffers coming off the wetland and buffers coming off the stream, and we're just making that last connection across the kind of developable portion of the lot.
So there is a reference to 300 feet somewhere in that code.
That's the corridor width.
That's the corridor width. Okay. So 200 feet correlates to really the buffer width, the high value or high category.
And kind of the expected separation you're going to see where this is applying.
Commissioner Collins, did you have a question?
Yeah, on stream for definition, we're not, our stream definition is not 2 feet wide, correct? And NP is what I'm really questioning.
You're wanting to know the definition of an NP stream?
Yes.
The definition of the stream is actually contained in the draft code before you, I think, just for reference purposes.
Yeah, the one I read was 2 feet. I'm wondering if that is incorrect. I might have read the wrong section for this.
That's the stream has to be.
I know.
Oh, yeah.
So I'll direct the commission's attention to page 85 of your deliberation draft. Pardon me, 86. And lines 3 through 7 on page 86, I'll bring it up on the screen in just 1 minute, provide the definition for an NP stream. I don't believe there's a width criteria in there.
It was where the outflow met the accepting water body is the text that I recall.
You may be thinking of the definition around a type F stream where it intersects Lake Sammamish and
So there's nothing like it for NP.
Not that I'm aware of.
Thank you.
I'll go on to page, I believe this is page 58. And what we have here throughout this page, and I believe even on to the next, are edits to this section to accommodate the new proposal proposed by staff. I'm happy to answer questions, but I'll react rather than read it to the commission.
So the portion of the code that you provided us earlier identifies development that has the potential to require a wildlife corridor, and now we're getting into what that wildlife corridor would be implemented. Is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. So I want to give commissioners just a quick opportunity to make sure that they have no questions about this particular area.
Perhaps one note of some use is this line 20 and 21. You have received public comment, I think, today related to items around the director's discretion. This would be an example of that.
Could you repeat that?
Oh, sorry.
Discussion.
You've received public comment, I think as recently as today, a written comment related to the director's discretion around some of these standards. Line 20 and 21 would represent an example of that.
Okay. Commissioner Islam.
Evan, as Chair mentioned a little while ago about 300-foot corridor width, is that what currently in existence in the rule? And what I referred to the consultant's best available science asking it to be widened. So is that where they have proposed to widen this, but we stayed with the existing width?
So what the wildlife habitat corridor width says right now, paraphrasing greatly, is that you have to provide a 300-foot width that can be reduced down to 150 feet in some circumstances. As I understood the best available science review we received from the consultant, they noted that in particular for large terrestrial animals, 300 feet in of itself was not sufficient. And so they actually recommended looking at wider widths. That would make more sense respectfully if we were identifying species of concern in Sammamish that would need such a width.
No, that's good. That's really helping me, my whole thought on this, and I think I'm staying confirmed with that.
So I have a couple of clarifying questions. The habitat management plan might identify a large terrestrial animal and potentially create an opportunity to require a larger corridor if such a large terrestrial animal was identified as using the site regularly. Would that be a true or a false statement?
Currently, that wouldn't be a true statement because I'm not aware of a large terrestrial animal that actually falls into our species of concerns with Fish and Wildlife that requires the larger corridor.
Okay, but if they cared about bears, then we would take care of them. Is that what I'm kind of
Yeah,
hearing?
and that
Okay.
is actually what that subsection E on lines 20 and 21 does.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. And also, there are other portions of the code that specifically identify criteria for when a width of a buffer, for example, might be increased beyond the stated widths based on specific criteria. Do we have a section like that for Fish and Wildlife corridor widths or no?
We do. It's actually those lines 20 and 21 on that page.
Okay, that's because it's much broad. It's more wordy for some of the other critical areas. So, all right.
Brevity is hard for city staff.
I would like to suggest that we consider an amendment to define a maximum width beyond which the director would not have discretion to impose on a particular site. I would be curious if anyone would be willing to second such an amendment.
Would you suggest a number?
I would be happy to defer to staff for a recommendation on the number, but for a maximum.
Well, I'm not sure I have a logical or a rational reason to give you a number. The current code does specify 300 feet, respectfully, Chair. What this section does here is it essentially says 300 feet unless there's a habitat management plan requirement that would expand beyond that. I don't know what those habitat management plans might be. If it was a black bear, for example, it might be 900 feet, and so I don't have a good rationale. I could.
But this one may be an interesting one, and I'm struggling how to say it in public. I have an interest, obviously, to follow the best available science to increase the corridor width. So I would be willing to support the chair if that increase is consistent with that best available science.
So that's what I was kind of wondering, is is there a recommended higher number from the best available science report that we could consider as a maximum corridor width? I think
They
it was
recommended a number much higher than 300.
correct.
Not necessarily that's the maximum number, but I suggest we can modify and say that would be our maximum.
Right. I accept your suggestion to modify my amendment. So what I'm proposing, this has not been seconded, by the way, yet, is that we specify a maximum corridor width that is based on the corridor widths that were recommended in the best available science report. So I will defer to staff to tell us what that number is in the next version of the code, should this get seconded and voted for.
I would second it now so
Okay.
that you can move into discussion.
Thank you. So with that, now we can have some further discussion. And I think I'm going to pause on Commissioner Collins based on his, do you want to give input, or you want to think about this for a minute?
I have problems digesting this. You're saying that we're going to do best available science, but we're going to limit it to 300 feet.
So the code says it's 300 feet. The code also says that the director can increase or decrease that number based on the wildlife management plan.
Right.
I'm suggesting that we define a maximum beyond which the director cannot increase that corridor width. And that maximum be informed by the best available science report that we have. So let's pretend that it says 500 feet. That would be the number that we would propose as the maximum corridor width to limit the director's discretion. Go ahead. Commissioner Wasserman.
I've got no say on it at this point. I guess I would defer to.
Okay. Do you want to?
As I have seconded, I would support the best available science reported suggested number for the width of the corridor to be the maximum allowable number by the director.
Oh, staff.
So I've opened up our handy resource guide, which has the best available science report, and it's summarized, I think, in 3 tables here, and I'll give you the upper end identified in each table, if I may. So in table 1, which is identified as adapted from Brennan et al., and we can pursue this further, the upper end is 902 feet. In table 2, which is identified as by May et al., the upper end for wildlife habitat is 140 feet.
Well, that's very helpful.
And in table 3, which is identified for riparian functions by Knutson and Neff in 1997, the upper end is 984 feet.
Okay, so I would like to propose that we limit the maximum to 900 feet. Commissioner Islam, are you comfortable with that?
Yes.
Okay. Commissioner Luxembourg.
2 things. I'd like to ask the director for his viewpoint relative to limiting his discretion.
I've always been a fan of appropriate discretion to apply judgment to individual cases, but with criteria or guidelines. I think a lot of people will sit in my chair, and we want to make sure there's continuity over time, so that my decision might vary from the next person's decision. We try to have those decisions consistent. So criteria are good. Upper limits are good. The 900 feet, I can't imagine myself imposing a 900-foot wide limit. So that's well beyond what I think we would consider applying in this case. I think you could safely have a little bit lower number if you choose to. I understand the goal of having certainty, and that's okay. So if it's that high,
Does it provide value that high?
I don't think it provides a lot of value. I'll tell you what was going through my head was, you know, if our standard corridor width is 300, it's 150 on each side, is that right? You know, a doubling of that would provide a pretty safe upper level to me. It doesn't correspond to a number that Evan just read, but Evan read a spectrum. So if you look at the spectrum of 100 and something to 900, maybe 600 falls in the middle of the spectrum, and it has I think, a more commonsensical relationship to our current standard.
Okay, Commissioner Luxembourg and Commissioner Islam have comments.
Now that I understand that input, I'm concerned about this, not because I think that the number is good or bad. This is the kind of thing that you do that has unintended consequences because we don't imagine everything that could happen. The purpose of this provision, the way it's written, is to allow some flexibility for things we don't know about right now. And I would suggest we would be smarter not to mess with it, because making it 600 or making it 900 it's not going to help anything. And you could have a problem later that we don't understand today.
Okay. Commissioner Islam.
Contrary to Commissioner Luxembourg's thought, and I rarely say something contrary to the Vice Chair, this is one where we probably have enough available scientific information to say what should be a range given the species we know that reside in this area. And the recommendation was 902, we curtailed to even 900. So as the director stated that he cannot imagine a point when he has to go that far, but at least we would give him a number that is consistent with today's science. And I hate to be in a position to just pick a magic number and then not able to justify it. So at least picking this number, meaning there is a justification in the science, information is there solid, that's why the BS recommendation came at 900. But I also like chairs understanding in that issue is that we are making it maximum and a very rare, so that in one hand, we are giving the director the flexibility if he feels there is a specific circumstance he needs to go there, but as he stated, he would not necessarily exercise that high of a number in most cases.
Commissioner Coleman.
Well, I don't agree that the science is solid because we had a range of 140 to 980.
Yeah.
And if you take the three and average them, you get about 660, something like that. So taking into account, I appreciate Commissioner Luxembourg's point, don't mess with it, but I'm going to put another twist on this. Taking into account Cameron's position, maybe we say it's 2 times, so you're getting close to that average of the 3 that we had. So 2 times the standard width, but I think if you're going to establish a maximum, you should establish a minimum. There's 2 ends to a bookcase, right? So if there's a maximum 2 times, there should be a minimum, 50%. I don't know.
Are you proposing another amendment? Before you answer that question, Evan, go ahead.
So 2 items I'd just like to note. One, the Planning Commission could, of course, recommend that the City Council direct staff to provide administrative rules around this specific item where we establish the benchmarks at a later date. A second approach, or a second item to note, of course, you did receive public comment related to this specific item tonight. Remind you, your rules, if you close your discussion tonight, would require a majority to reopen.
Thank you. Okay, so let me go back to Commissioner Coleman. Would you like us to entertain an amendment for a minimum after we've entertained the amendment for a maximum?
Yes.
Okay, we'll get to that in a moment. Commissioner Collins and Commissioner Wasserman, do you have any further input or discussion?
I think this is a great grounds for either hiring or demoting a director for community development. Let him do what he'd like to do, and we'll
So
see
you're
how it
not
goes.
supporting
I'm
defining
not
a
supporting
maximum? Okay, great. Commissioner Wasserman.
I'm just trying to find out if a bear is really going to care whether it's 400 or 900. I mean, really. I don't think I would support putting an upper limit on.
Okay. Any other discussion before we take a vote? Okay, so I'm going to start with Commissioner Collins. Yay or nay?
On
On defining a maximum of 900 feet. Maximum corridor width. Nay?
Nay.
Great. Commissioner Wasserman?
Nay.
Commissioner Islam?
Yeah.
Commissioner Luxembourg?
No.
Commissioner Coleman?
No.
Aha. I will say yes, this amendment fails with a vote of 4-2. So now that we have a failed on the maximum, do you want to propose a minimum?
No.
Okay. Perfect. Any other proposed amendments to the code that's presented in front of us currently? Are there any other sections that relate to this particular policy item?
So I'll remind the commission, we did add some definitions at the end of this draft regulations on page 78 and page 79. I'll pull those up on the screen. So you'll see lines 12 through 18, we've defined fish and wildlife habitat corridors. This is consistent with the regulations up above. And pardon me, that's, we've amended the definition of fish and wildlife habitat conservation areas. That amendment is on page 79, line 4 and 5.
Wait, conservation areas or corridors?
Conservation areas.
Oh, I see.
So
Sorry,
wildlife-
I'm with you. Never mind. I retract my question.
Evan, just a question. I see in the definition section, I think later on, naturally occurring ponds are deleted
Yes.
as a definition. Then just on this page, page 77, where 21A 15468, where the conservation areas are defined, if you look at item 2, it says streams, lakes, and naturally occurring ponds. I'm wondering whether that wording should be there since definition is being deleted.
It should not.
Okay. Can you explain a little bit why we are deleting naturally occurring ponds definition altogether?
I can. Would you like me to do it now, or as part of our review of the overall
I would
code at the end?
wait if it is part of something else.
Yeah. We'll wait, but be prepared for that next week. Any other related changes to 4213? I don't see any in my notes. Does anyone else have any comments or questions? So I will note that it's 9:15. We can take a pause and commence next week, or we can continue with a few more. I see some nodding for pausing for tonight.
I think we got to keep going.
So let's go, start on the left and go to the right. Who wants to continue?
Did we have a vote on that last item so that we're done with it?
Okay, let's get done.
What?
Oh, yeah, please do vote on
Yeah, let's get
213.
done with 213.
I'm sorry, what do we need to vote on?
213.
On 213C?
We already voted on it. The vote,
On the amendment to it, I
no,
think.
we
for
voted
the-
on 213 5-1. Commissioner
first.
Islam said
No.
nay.
Yeah.
The rest of us said yay. There were no amendments to the codes.
Yeah.
Well, there was an amendment to the code that was proposed and not approved, so we're done with 213.
You're right.
Did I miss something? Trying very hard to.
I thought we needed a vote on the code too, but is
Yeah,
that not
yeah.
the way we need to do it?
I thought you were taking votes on the draft code,
Yeah.
but perhaps
Oh, all
not.
right, we can vote on the code if you'd like. Commissioner Collins,
Nay.
you're voting no on the code.
Correct.
Wait.
Access this
Start over again.
information.
The code is consistent with the policy.
My problem was with NP and the 200
so
feet.
he's-
I just disagree with the definition, and so my vote is no.
So it's changing.
Continue.
Would,
Just
so
for your
before I
right.
continue, would you like to propose an amendment that would?
No.
Okay, so we have a, okay. Commissioner Wasserman?
Yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Islam?
I'll be consistent and say no.
Commissioner Luxembourg?
Yes.
Okay, Commissioner Coleman?
Yes.
And I will say yes, so 4-2 on the code. All right.
You can say no for different
And
reasons.
I want to make sure that we, because we are not unanimous in some of these decisions, I want to make sure that we briefly capture kind of the distinction. So for Commissioner Collins, it was the NP definition, the NP stream definition was driving your no. And Commissioner Islam, I noted that the species of concern and the increased corridor widths per
Yes.
BAS were the drivers for your nay.
Yes.
Okay, very good. Okay, now we'll talk about whether or not we go on to the next item, which would be wetland buffer modified by conditions, just to give you a little preview. Not that anybody's made a motion yet. So,
Aye.
Commissioner Collins, you
Aye.
would like to continue. Commissioner Wasserman,
Nay.
Commissioner Islam,
No, unfortunately, I have to go to work tomorrow morning.
Commissioner Luxembourg,
I'd like to continue.
Commissioner Coleman.
No.
Okay, we have 3 noes and 2 yeses, which makes it either a tie or not.
Yes, but you get Joe if you say no.
So I will vote no, actually. I will honor the fact that there are several commissioners that would like to
Good work.
conclude for the evening. So we will start next week. I would briefly, before I close tonight's meeting, we very much would like to conclude our deliberations next week. Do I have a commitment in spirit to continuing until we're done at our next meeting? Commissioner Collins?
I would appreciate if you'd also ask the question if we can start at 6.
I would be happy to ask that question. So I think what we're talking about is potentially starting at 6 and going until we're done at our next meeting. Does anybody have any major heartburn about that?
Depends on what we're talking about is done. I mean, if we're talking 2 o'clock in the morning, no, I have heartburn with that.
I think that if we get close to 2 o'clock in the morning, we will.
Well, again, I mean, if we're 10, 11 o'clock, no, I'm not going to go for that.
Okay. So there's still an upper limit in time. In
Absolutely.
spirit, you support it, but in spirit, we also have an upper limit in our capability to have a thoughtful conversation.
Correct.
Okay. Commissioner Islam?
I'd like to see no change starting still at 6:30.
Okay.
And I will be prepared well so that I don't take a whole lot of redundant time, and that's a responsibility I have. but I would like to finish around 9:30, or at least before 10, so that I can go to
Okay,
work.
so we'll have a goal of 9:30 or 10 finish time, drop dead time, okay. This will inform kind of our planning, so I just want to get that input. Commissioner Luxembourg?
I think it's very important that we complete our assignment, and I think if we have a large gap between Christmas and after the first of the year, it will be detrimental. So I understand the concern other people have, and I'm willing to go along with that to the extent we need to, but I'm willing to do what it takes.
So you're willing to start at 6?
I'm willing to start at 6, I'm willing to go later. And I think if we prepare properly and we are expeditious, we will not have to be too long.
Okay, Commissioner Coleman?
Question. Are we going to get anything new from staff between now and next week?
Great question.
You asked us to follow up on a couple of items tonight as part of our evaluation form related to item 415F. We will need to follow back with you at least at the start of the meeting next week, if not with material.
Anything that came in today that we haven't...
And anything that came in today, of course, during our review that we identify as necessary to bring to your attention.
Okay, Commissioner Collins?
Is there any chance you can get to that quickly and send something out by email so that it's...
I can do my best.
Could-
Pardon me for the gesture.
What was the gesture, man?
Do his best.
You don't hear me? Do you think that's possible, or? I know I didn't have time to read it when it was handed to me.
We'll do the best we can. Before early next week, I think it will be very hard. We'll do our best to get it out tomorrow if we can, but I'm not going to promise.
I would suggest you do it in increments if you can, Evan.
Yeah, whatever.
So our expectation is we potentially have a new version of 415F. And we will have identified items of substance from the public hearing comment that we received through 6:30 today.
So, and pardon me to explain perhaps why I'm not confident in tomorrow. Both of those require internal coordination on the part of staff, and I'm not privy to everybody's calendar.
Okay. Okay. So yes, I do like the idea suggesting that we have everything by Tuesday. I think that would be a request from the commission that hopefully you can honor.
That'll be our goal.
Thank you.
I think, Chair, I'm probably fairly optimistic. We had a good day tonight. I mean, we had evaluations, we had a lot of substance. We are now in the rolling mode, going line by line. Major items should be done in less than 2 hours' time.
I agree. I think it's the minor items that may take more time since there are several of them. So we'll take a look at that. So I'm not sure that we have enough consensus around a 6 o'clock start. Commissioner Islam,
Just not flexible. Let's start at 6:30, and I'm willing to change if that day is okay for me to stay as long as I need to stay. But starting time, because of my commute, it just does not become...
Commissioner Collins.
Can we explain it a different way? Can we start the business of the committee at 6 and then start deliberations at 6:30?
I just don't want to miss anything.
We won't be doing anything substantive.
We are not going to spend a half an hour on business items.
Really? We did
Yes.
today.
I will make...
It took 5-10 minutes today.
We spent a lot of time on the evaluation forms, but we will, the director and I will commit to you that the calling to order of the meetings, yes, we will have that go very quickly, 5 minutes or less. Start at 6:30. Now, the other request that I have for commissioners is those items that you have where you've made notes, where you have questions or concerns, if you could please provide that input to the chair, the vice chair, and staff so that we can have that information to help facilitate the discussion would be very useful. Commissioner Collins?
I would suggest just one contact person, and that'd be Debbie.
So, yes, please, Debbie, are you comfortable with that? That we funnel all of our input about things that we would like to discuss to you, and that you will distribute that to the chair, the vice chair, and staff? Okay, great, because we'll use that to manage our meeting time, hopefully a little bit, even more efficiently. Commissioner Luxembourg, do you have any?
No, I think that's a really good idea.
Okay, great. So with that, any other comments, questions? Thank you very much. I will, oh, sorry.
I heard the chair and vice chair want to thank the public in our earlier conversation, and I just wanted to prompt you to express those thanks here tonight, because it has been a lot of input from the public,
Thank
which we're
you.
thankful for.
And I do think we'll offer all of the commissioners an opportunity to make a brief comment on this, but yes, we do very much appreciate the public participation and the public feedback and the level of detail that has been provided. It's been very useful. So, and it has not gone unnoticed at all. With that, I will close the meeting at 9:25 p.m. Thank you very much.
Did we have a color of a flag?
Color of a flag? I think I was able to not